Morality is a social invention to control the strong. Throughout history, morality has often been portrayed as a universal code, a divine or rational framework designed to guide all human beings toward goodness. But from the perspective of Friedrich Nietzsche, this is a dangerous illusion. Morality, he argued, was not born from objective truth or noble intentions, but rather from resentment specifically, the resentment of the weak toward the strong. In Nietzsche's analysis, morality is not a reflection of eternal truths, but a strategic invention, a cultural technology crafted by the powerless to limit and domesticate those who possess natural strength, ambition, or excellence. In primitive societies, values were shaped by what Nietzsche called master morality. This value system praised strength, vitality, pride, and power. The strong did not ask whether something was good in a moral sense. It was good because it expressed their power and affirmed life. Good was associated with nobility, courage, and greatness. Bad simply meant weak or pathetic, without malice. But, as society became more organized, the majority, the weak, the resentful, the powerless began to reshape morality into what Nietzsche called slave morality. In this framework, the virtues of the strong were rebranded as vices. Power became evil. Pride became arrogance. Self-assertion was condemned as selfishness. Meanwhile, submission, humility, obedience, and pity were redefined as moral virtues. These values served a social function. They made the strong feel guilty about their strength and suppressed their instinct to dominate or stand apart. The weak could not defeat the strong through direct confrontation, so they fought using guilt, shame, and moral pressure. Thus, morality became a political weapon, a tool to control human nature, particularly the instincts of those who might rise above the herd. This is not to say all moral behavior is false or worthless, but rather that the origins of morality are deeply intertwined with power dynamics. When a society elevates self-sacrifice over ambition or obedience over critical thinking, it is not always doing so out of compassion or wisdom. It may simply be engineering conformity. This idea challenges a deeply embedded belief in the fairness of moral norms. If morality is not about universal justice, but about leveling the field to favor the mediocre, then many of the values we take for granted may be little more than forms of manipulation. The strong, in this worldview, are not evil, they are dangerous, only because they remind others of their inferiority. From this lens, to be moral is often to play a rigged game, one designed to reward docility and punish individuality. The implications are chilling. Society, in its quest for order, may be actively stifling greatness. The strongest among us are not broken by violence, they are broken by guilt. Pity prolongs the suffering of the weak. Arthur Schopenhauer, a philosopher known for his bleak but brilliant worldview, believed that life was inherently marked by suffering. To live is to want, and to want is to lack. This endless cycle of desire and disappointment is the foundation of human existence. In such a world, pity might seem like a necessary balm, an instinctual way of reaching out to those in pain. But Schopenhauer's understanding of pity was more complex, and in its darker interpretation, it can be seen not as a virtue, but as a trap. Pity, when indulged recklessly, freezes people in their suffering. It validates their condition as permanent, justifiable, even sacred. It fosters passivity and dependency rather than strength or transformation. When one constantly receives pity, they are not encouraged to rise above their circumstances, they are comforted into accepting them. Moreover, pity often comes with an unconscious sense of superiority. To pity someone is to declare, on some level, I am not you. It can be drenched in condescension, even when disguised as compassion. The act of pitying reinforces a hierarchy, the comforter above the sufferer, and over time, this can turn the relationship toxic. The one who is pitied learns to rely on external sympathy rather than internal resilience. In a more Nietzschean sense, pity becomes a tool of decay. It interferes with natural selection, by nurturing the weak and halting the will to overcome adversity. Life, at its core, is a process of overcoming the will to power is not just about domination, but about becoming stronger through resistance. When pity shields individuals from this struggle, it denies them the opportunity to grow. It anesthetizes the pain instead of helping them work through it. This idea is particularly dangerous in modern culture, where victimhood can become a currency of moral authority. The more one suffers or claims to suffer, the more attention, leniency, and praise they receive. In such a climate, pity is not just an emotion, it's a commodity. It rewards stagnation and discourages recovery. People may begin to identify with their pain, wear it like a badge, and build their entire identity around it. That's not to say compassion has no place. But compassion is not the same as pity. True compassion seeks to elevate, not indulge. It does not sit with the sufferer and weep. It challenges them, pushes them, and sometimes leaves them to struggle in solitude so they can discover their own strength. Schopenhauer may have seen pity as more noble than other instincts, but even he warned of its ability to entangle us in cycles of shared misery. To pity someone perpetually is to trap them in the very suffering you wish to soothe. Sometimes, the most merciful act is to withhold sympathy and let suffering burn clean rather than fester. Truth is a weapon used by those in power. Michel Foucault, one of the most influential postmodern thinkers of the 20th century, did not believe that truth was some independent, universal entity floating above human affairs. Instead, he argued that truth was constructed shaped by historical forces, cultural norms, and, most critically, power structures. According to Foucault, what a society accepts as truth is deeply entangled with the institutions that benefit from that truth being accepted. In this view, truth is not neutral. It does not exist independently of human interest. Instead, every truth emerges from a field of power shaped by governments, religions, schools, media, and legal systems. These institutions do not merely reflect truth, they produce it. Through language, discipline, surveillance, and repetition, they sculpt what people believe to be reality. The result is a kind of regime of truth, a system in which certain discourses are legitimized and others silenced. This is not done through censorship alone, but through normalization. Ideas that align with the dominant power structure are seen as logical, scientific, or moral. Contradictory ideas are labeled as dangerous, insane, or irrelevant. For example, in a society where the state controls education, the curriculum becomes a tool to establish a national identity, a shared history, and accepted hierarchies. In such a system, what is taught as truth in schools is actually a narrative, one that serves the interests of the state. Even science, often upheld as the pinnacle of objectivity, is influenced by who funds research, who has access to publish, and which questions are allowed to be asked. Foucault's insight is radical because it dismantles the idea of truth as inherently liberating. In fact, he shows how truth can be oppressive. When truth is dictated by the powerful, it becomes a means of discipline. People internalize norms and police themselves, believing they are acting freely when in reality they are obeying unseen rules. This is what Foucault called biopower control, not just over actions but over the mind and body. Thus, truth becomes a weapon disguised as virtue. It legitimizes laws, justifies punishment, defines sanity, and regulates bodies. Those who speak a different truth, the mad, the deviant, the rebellious, are marginalized, medicated, or erased. Power does not need to silence them violently, it simply ensures they are never heard. To understand truth as a product of power is not to descend into nihilism, but to gain clarity. It allows us to ask, who benefits from this truth? Whose voice is missing? What alternatives have been buried? In Foucault's world, the struggle is not for truth, but for the right to define it. Most people live like herd animals, obedient, unthinking, and afraid. Friedrich Nietzsche introduced the concept of herd morality to describe the behaviors of the majority individuals who prefer security, conformity, and predictability over danger, challenge, or self-overcoming. According to him, the average person is not guided by independent reason or authentic desire, but by the need to belong. They adopt the values and beliefs of the crowd not because they are true or noble, but because it feels safer to blend in than to stand out. The herd is comfortable in its obedience. People follow rules not because they have deeply contemplated them, but because they were taught those rules from birth. From early schooling to corporate culture, obedience is rewarded. Children are praised for compliance. Workers are promoted for loyalty. Society conditions individuals to equate submission with virtue and to view questioning authority as dangerous or deviant. As a result, most people suppress their own instincts in favor of collective norms. They do what is expected, not what is meaningful. Thinking, in this context, is outsourced. Instead of grappling with difficult questions, what is good? What is true? What is worth pursuing? The herd relies on the answers given by religion, the state, media, or tradition. Independent thought is seen as a burden, or worse, a threat. The fear of exclusion keeps people locked into groupthink. To deviate is to risk being labeled as arrogant, rebellious, or immoral. It is easier to be agreeable, even if it means living a lie. Fear is the engine that drives this obedience. Fear of judgment, fear of isolation, fear of failure. These fears make individuals cling to the herd, even when the herd is heading toward the cliff. Nietzsche warned that this dynamic doesn't just discourage greatness, it actively crushes it. The person who seeks to rise above the herd, the free spirit or Übermensch, is mocked, attacked, or silenced. Not because they are wrong, but because they remind others of what they lack: courage. The herd does not seek truth or beauty, it seeks comfort and familiarity. That is why popular entertainment is shallow, why politics reward populism, and why religious dogma persists. The herd wants stories that flatter, not ideas that challenge. It wants certainty, even if it's false, because ambiguity causes anxiety. Living authentically requires confronting that anxiety and embracing solitude, something most people cannot bear. This condition is not just a matter of intelligence, but of will. Even smart people can live like herd animals if they refuse to take responsibility for their lives. The tragedy is not that people are ignorant, but that they choose ignorance. They fear freedom more than oppression, because freedom demands action, risk, and transformation. The herd, in its obedience, becomes a prison, a comfortable one, but a prison nonetheless. Love is just a trick of nature to ensure reproduction. Arthur Schopenhauer approached love not as a poetic ideal, but as a biological imperative, a cunning trick played by nature to fulfill one central goal: reproduction. What we call romantic love, he argued, is not about soulmates or eternal connection, it is about genetic selection. The intense emotional highs, the longing, the obsessive thinking, and the heartbreak, all of it serves a deeper, blind function: to produce and optimize offspring. From this standpoint, love is not about you. It is about the species. Individuals are merely vessels, through which nature ensures its continuity. When you fall in love, you are not making a spiritual discovery, you are being manipulated by forces older and deeper than reason. You are drawn to traits that signal fertility, health, strength, and compatibility, even if you don't realize it. The chemistry people speak of is nothing more than instinctual attraction, evolved over millennia to produce viable children. This view shatters the sentimentalized image of love as something pure or divine. Instead, it casts love as a trap, baited with pleasure and reinforced by emotional dependence. Once captured, individuals often commit to long-term partnerships, which provide a stable environment for raising children. But the moment reproduction is no longer a concern, once the children are born and raised, the illusion begins to fade. Passion wanes, resentment grows. The lovers realize they were never in love with each other, but with a dream, a biological hallucination. Even the suffering associated with love, jealousy, heartbreak, longing serves a purpose. It reinforces monogamy, discourages infidelity, and punishes deviation. Nature doesn't care if you're happy, it cares that you reproduce. Schopenhauer believed that if people saw love clearly for what it was, they would resist its pull. But few can. The illusion is too powerful. Nature has stacked the deck in favor of reproduction by disguising it as romance. Modern society has only intensified this illusion. Entire industries are built around the fantasy of eternal love. Movies, songs, literature, and marketing all perpetuate the myth that finding the one will complete us. Yet the divorce rates, infidelity, and emotional burnout suggest that this promise is fundamentally flawed. What people call falling out of love is often just waking up from nature's spell. This perspective does not deny the emotional richness of love, but it reframes it as a means to an end, not an end in itself. True connection, if it exists, must transcend the biological imperative. It must be rooted in shared values, mutual respect, and conscious choice, not just chemical attraction. Otherwise, love is just biology in disguise, a beautiful lie told by evolution. Freedom is an illusion sustained by invisible systems of control. Michel Foucault dismantled the idea that freedom is a natural state, something you either have or don't have. For him, modern societies don't eliminate control. They refine it. In place of brute force, they create subtle systems, laws, norms, surveillance, education, medicine, that shape how people behave, think, and even feel. These systems don't look like chains, but they are chains nonetheless. The genius of modern power is that it convinces people they are free while guiding their every move. This is what Foucault called disciplinary power. Unlike old models of power that ruled through violence and public punishment, disciplinary power works in quieter, more efficient ways. Schools don't just teach math, they teach punctuality, obedience, and hierarchy. Prisons don't just punish, they normalize deviance. Hospitals don't just heal, they define what counts as sane or normal. The result is a society where people regulate themselves out of fear of being watched, judged, or excluded. They internalize power, becoming their own wardens. This illusion of freedom is reinforced by what Foucault described as biopower, the regulation of life itself. Governments and institutions manage populations by tracking birth rates, death rates, disease, productivity, and behavior. They intervene in intimate aspects of life, sexuality, gender identity, mental health, under the guise of help or science. But this intervention is not neutral. It reflects the values of those in power, and it defines what is acceptable or deviant. People are told they are free to choose, but their choices are pre-structured. You can vote, but within a narrow political spectrum. You can express yourself, but within socially acceptable boundaries. You can succeed, but only by following institutional paths. Dissent is tolerated, but only when it is harmless. Real freedom, the kind that threatens the system, is met with censorship, ridicule, or marginalization. Even identity itself is shaped by these forces. What it means to be a man, a woman, a citizen, a criminal, or a patient is constructed through layers of discourse. We inherit scripts and roles without questioning their origin. We think we are acting freely, but we are performing expectations. The language we speak, the categories we use, and the goals we pursue are all conditioned. Foucault did not offer easy solutions. He believed that power is everywhere, and there is no outside of it. But by becoming aware of these systems, individuals can begin to resist them, not by escaping, but by subverting. True freedom, if it exists, lies in the cracks of these structures, in the act of seeing clearly what others take for granted. Altruism is vanity wearing a mask. Altruism is commonly held up as the pinnacle of moral virtue, the selfless act of helping others with no expectation of reward. But when scrutinized through the lens of psychology, evolutionary biology, and Nietzschean philosophy, altruism begins to unravel. Beneath its noble surface, it often conceals a subtle form of vanity. People do good not simply out of pure concern for others, but because it makes them feel important, needed, or morally superior. At its core, altruism challenges one of nature's fundamental laws, self-preservation. Yet nature is not irrational. If altruism exists, it must serve some kind of evolutionary function, and it does. Biologists point to reciprocal altruism, the idea that we help others because we expect help in return, even if subconsciously. Early humans who cooperated had a better chance of survival. Those who didn't were cast out. Altruistic behavior became a trait that ensured group cohesion, not selflessness. In modern society, altruism continues to function as a form of social currency. The one who gives becomes elevated, seen as generous, good-hearted, and admirable. This perception fuels the desire to give. Acts of charity are often accompanied by publicity, praise, or at the very least, internal self-satisfaction. People post their donations online, volunteer for applause, and speak often of their sacrifices. It is not the act itself, but the image of the act that matters most. Altruism, in these moments, becomes a vehicle for ego gratification. Nietzsche was especially suspicious of so-called moral behavior. In his critique, altruism was part of slave morality, a value system that glorifies weakness and submission. He believed that the selfless person is often the one most eager to be seen as selfless. The saint, the martyr, the philanthropist, they are not free of ego, but completely absorbed by it. They gain power not through domination, but through moral positioning. They are adored precisely because they appear to deny themselves. This creates a paradox. The more one seeks to appear selfless, the more selfish the act becomes. True altruism, if it exists, would require absolute anonymity, no recognition, no reward, not even a feeling of pride. But very few can give without at least the internal satisfaction of being a good person. That satisfaction, however subtle, is a form of vanity. Even at the psychological level, altruism serves the self. Helping others can alleviate guilt, ease anxiety, and provide a sense of purpose. It allows people to project onto the world their own desire for meaning. In essence, they are helping others to help themselves. This doesn't make altruism bad, but it does make it far from pure. In the end, altruism is not a rejection of the self, but an extension of it. It allows individuals to be both moral and admired, selfless and superior. It's a clever arrangement, a moral mask worn by the ego. And the ego, ever adaptable, is all too happy to wear it. God is dead, and we killed him. When Friedrich Nietzsche declared that God is dead, he was not speaking of the literal death of a divine being. He was announcing a cultural and philosophical revolution. The statement was a metaphor, a way of capturing the collapse of traditional religious belief in the modern West. But more than that, it was an accusation. God had not simply faded away. We had killed him through reason, science, and secularism. The Enlightenment had elevated reason above revelation. Science had explained natural phenomena without recourse to divine intervention. Philosophy had begun to question the authority of sacred texts. Bit by bit, the foundations of Christianity and of belief itself began to erode. By the 19th century, for many intellectuals, God was no longer necessary to explain the world. But Nietzsche saw this not as progress, but as a crisis. Without God, there could be no absolute morality, no transcendent meaning, no ultimate authority. What was once sacred had become negotiable. In the vacuum left behind, Nietzsche feared humanity would drift into nihilism, the belief that life is meaningless, that there is no purpose, no truth, no value. The death of God meant the death of certainty, and the death of certainty meant the unraveling of civilization's moral and cultural fabric. Yet Nietzsche was not nostalgic for religion. He despised the way it suppressed life's instincts, glorified weakness, and made suffering sacred. But he also understood that belief in God had provided a psychological anchor. With that gone, something new had to take its place. Otherwise, people would descend into despair, or grasp blindly at ideologies, fanaticism, or hedonism. This is where Nietzsche introduced the concept of the Übermensch, the overman, or higher human. If God was dead, then it was up to humanity to create its own values, its own purpose, its own morality. The Übermensch was not a tyrant, but a creator, someone brave enough to live without illusions, to affirm life even in the face of suffering, and to become the author of meaning. But few are capable of this. Most people, Nietzsche believed, would prefer comfort over truth. They would cling to the corpse of God, pretending he still lived. Or worse, they would replace him with secular gods, the state, ideology, celebrity, or consumerism. These substitutes offer a semblance of structure, but they lack the sacred weight that once held society together. The death of God was not just a moment in history. It was a challenge, a call to spiritual maturity. Without divine command, morality becomes a human responsibility. Without eternal reward, meaning must be forged in this life. To live after God's death is to live without excuses. It is to carry the burden of freedom, terrifying, yes, but also liberating. Civilization is built upon sublimated violence. Civilization presents itself as the triumph of order over chaos, reason over instinct, peace over conflict. But underneath the paved streets, written laws, and social contracts lies a deeper truth. Civilization is not the absence of violence, but its transformation. The violence doesn't disappear, it is sublimated, redirected into more acceptable forms, and woven into the very structures that claim to suppress it. Sigmund Freud explored this idea in Civilization and Its Discontents, where he argued that the repression of primal drives, aggression, lust, domination, was essential for social life. Humans, left unchecked, would be driven by the pleasure principle, the instinctual pursuit of immediate gratification. To coexist, society had to enforce the repression of these instincts. But repressed energy doesn't vanish. It festers, transforms, and often re-emerges in socially sanctioned forms. Laws are one example. They codify violence and give it legitimacy. The state, through its monopoly on force, punishes transgressors and maintains order. Police, courts, and prisons are not evidence of peace. They are evidence that violence has been institutionalized. Instead of personal vengeance, we have legal retribution. Instead of tribal warfare, we have nation-states and armies. Economic systems also reflect sublimated violence. Competition in capitalism is often brutal, but it is framed as meritocracy. People are not beaten with sticks, but with debt, poverty, and exclusion. The ruthless pursuit of profit can destroy lives, but it is praised as ambition. Workers are exploited, resources are hoarded, and inequality is normalized, yet the violence remains hidden behind contracts and market forces. Cultural norms and values also channel violence. Religion may preach peace, but historically it has been a vehicle for conquest, control, and suppression. Education systems teach discipline and obedience, not just knowledge. Language itself can be a tool of domination, shaping what can be thought, said, or questioned. Even in families, power dynamics persist. Parents discipline children, often through fear. Hierarchy is taught early. Michel Foucault's analysis of power shows that modern civilization controls not just bodies, but minds. Surveillance, normalization, and categorization are new forms of control. They are soft, invisible, and internalized. People police themselves because they have been taught to do so. The result is a population that appears free but is profoundly constrained. Rituals, sports, entertainment, all provide outlets for aggression. Instead of war, we have football. Instead of public executions, we have crime dramas. Civilization gives violence a stage, a costume, and an audience. It channels destructive energy into narratives that feel safe, controlled, and even cathartic. To say civilization is built on sublimated violence is not to dismiss its achievements, but it is to acknowledge that those achievements come at a cost. Peace is not the natural state of humanity. It is a performance, maintained by the threat of punishment and the redirection of primal urges. Beneath every courthouse, office tower, or cathedral lies the shadow of the club, the spear, the prison. There is no objective truth, only power struggles. Michel Foucault's work shattered the conventional idea that truth is a stable, objective phenomenon waiting to be discovered. Instead, he proposed that truth is not found but produced, and not by some neutral process, but by systems of power. For Foucault, truth is not separate from politics, economics, or culture. It is created and maintained by institutions that benefit from defining what counts as true. These truths then become embedded in discourses, structured ways of thinking and speaking that regulate society and individuals. Truth, in this view, does not emerge from a divine source or a purely rational process. It is forged in the furnace of power relations. What becomes accepted as true is not what is most accurate, but what is most useful to those in control. Governments, religions, medical establishments, legal systems, all of these institutions decide which narratives are legitimate. The truths they promote are not necessarily lies, but they are partial, carefully curated, and deeply tied to the maintenance of authority. This is why what is true changes across history. At different times, it was true that the earth was flat, that women were mentally inferior, that slavery was natural, or that homosexuality was a disease. These weren't scientific errors. They were expressions of dominant power structures. Once those structures shifted, the truth changed too. The fact that truth can be overturned suggests it was never objective to begin with. It was enforced consensus, not eternal fact. Education, media, and science all play a role in constructing and maintaining truths. They act as filters, determining what information is elevated and what is suppressed. This does not mean knowledge is fake, but that it is always framed. Even facts are selected, contextualized, and interpreted through ideological lenses. The narrative of objectivity serves as a disguise, making power appear neutral and inevitable. Foucault's point was not that there is no reality, but that our access to it is always mediated. We don't see the world directly. We see it through inherited categories, languages, and systems of meaning. This means truth is a battlefield, a place where different groups fight to define reality itself. The truth of one era may be the heresy of the next, not because logic failed, but because the balance of power shifted. Understanding this forces a rethinking of how we engage with knowledge. Instead of asking, "Is this true?" we might ask, "Who does this truth serve?" Or, what is made possible or impossible by accepting this version of reality? These are political questions, not just philosophical ones. In this sense, truth is never neutral. It is shaped, molded, and deployed in the service of agendas. It silences some voices while amplifying others. It defines who is sane or insane, legal or illegal, moral or deviant. In the end, truth is not a destination, it is the outcome of struggle, and whoever wins that struggle gets to write the rules of reality. Ethics are dictated by the victors of history. The idea that history is written by the victors is a familiar one, but it extends beyond military conquest or political domination. It also shapes ethics. The dominant moral values of a society are not eternal truths passed down from the heavens. They are often the codified preferences of those who won. Whether by violence, influence, or ideology, the groups that emerge victorious in any power struggle get to define what is considered good, evil, just, or unjust. This process is not always overt. Ethical norms are absorbed gradually through education, religion, and cultural rituals. They become invisible frameworks that people rarely question because they seem self-evident. But peel back the layers of history, and one finds that these ethical norms often arise after conflict and conquest. The Roman Empire, for example, imposed its values across vast territories, reshaping local customs and belief systems. The Christian Church, once persecuted, became the moral authority for centuries after it aligned with imperial power. Nietzsche saw this clearly in his critique of slave morality. He argued that the moral values of modern Western civilization, humility, meekness, self-sacrifice, were not universal virtues, but the values of the oppressed, institutionalized after they gained power through religious and social movements. These values were reactions to the master morality of the strong, which celebrated power, pride, and achievement. Once the tables turned, the morality of the weak became the new orthodoxy. Even the Enlightenment, often heralded as the birth of universal human rights, was shaped by colonial powers that defined freedom in terms that conveniently justified their own expansion. The ethics of liberty, democracy, and equality were praised, but only for some. Entire populations were excluded, enslaved, or exterminated in the name of progress. The ethical justifications followed the flag. Modern ethical systems continue to reflect the interests of dominant groups. Laws are written by those in power, often to protect property, capital, and authority. Norms around sexuality, gender, and race are not neutral. They emerge from cultural battles, where one view triumphed over another. What one generation condemns as perversion, another celebrates as identity. What one society honors as patriotism, another remembers as atrocity. This does not mean all ethics are false or cynical. It means that ethical norms are contextual, not universal. They are shaped by power dynamics, not moral absolutes. To accept any ethical system uncritically is to accept the legitimacy of the victors who crafted it. Recognizing this allows for a more honest engagement with morality. It invites skepticism, critical thinking, and humility. Instead of asking, "What is right?" one might ask, "Who decided this was right?" and "What alternative was silenced in the process?" Ethical systems, like histories, are contested terrains. The fact that one system currently reigns does not mean it is the final word. It simply means someone won for now. Most people's opinions are not their own, they are echoes. People like to believe their beliefs are their own. They imagine their opinions were formed through personal experience, reasoned thinking, and free choice. But in truth, most individuals inherit their views. They absorb them from parents, media, peers, institutions, and culture at large. Rather than original thoughts, what they carry are echoes, the reverberations of dominant narratives repeated until they seem natural, even inevitable. This process begins in childhood. From the earliest age, individuals are immersed in a web of values and assumptions. They are taught what to believe before they are even capable of questioning. Religion, patriotism, gender roles, morality, these are all instilled long before critical faculties are fully developed. By the time a child becomes an adult, the core framework of belief is already in place. Mass media reinforces this. News outlets, entertainment platforms, and social media don't just inform, they shape. They filter reality through selective framing, repetition, and emotional manipulation. People are bombarded with messages that tell them what to think, who to admire, what to fear, and what to ignore. The illusion of choice persists, but the menu is narrow. You can pick between options, but the options themselves are predetermined. Social conformity adds another layer. Human beings are tribal creatures. They seek belonging, and belonging requires alignment. Expressing unpopular opinions can lead to ridicule, exclusion, or worse. As a result, most people adjust their views to match their environment not out of dishonesty, but out of survival. They internalize the dominant opinions of their group and convince themselves these beliefs are the result of independent reasoning. The educational system contributes as well. Rather than teaching students how to think, many institutions teach what to think. Curricula are shaped by political agendas, economic interests, and cultural taboos. Critical thinking is often confined to safe areas. Questioning the fundamentals, the moral, national, or ideological foundations, is rarely encouraged. Students who challenge the orthodoxy are seen as disruptive, not insightful. This mass imitation of thought creates a culture of mental mimicry. People repeat slogans, quote authorities, and adopt fashionable causes without fully understanding them. They consume ideas the same way they consume products quickly, uncritically, and superficially. Debate becomes an exchange of borrowed talking points rather than genuine exploration. This is not a condemnation of all belief, but a call to self-awareness. To think independently requires effort, discomfort, and risk. It means confronting one's inherited assumptions, seeking out opposing views, and tolerating uncertainty. It means listening to silence instead of echo. Most people are not dishonest, they are conditioned. They are unaware of how deeply their thoughts have been shaped by forces beyond their control. But the first step toward intellectual freedom is recognizing the echo and choosing not to repeat it. You are not free, you are conditioned. The modern world cherishes the idea of freedom. It is enshrined in constitutions, preached by media, and marketed in consumer slogans. People are told they are free to choose their beliefs, their careers, their identities, their destinies. But beneath this facade lies a sobering reality. What most people call freedom is, in fact, a carefully shaped illusion. From the moment of birth, individuals are conditioned, trained, shaped, and programmed by environments they did not choose, under influences they rarely notice. Conditioning begins before language. The way a baby is held, soothed, spoken to, all of this imprints early neural patterns. By the time the child learns to speak, their world is already framed by culture. They learn not just words, but meanings, not just facts, but values. They are told who they are, what is good, what is bad, and what roles are acceptable. This is not freedom, it is the installation of a social operating system. Schools reinforce this process. Ostensibly places of education, schools function as training grounds for conformity. They reward obedience, punctuality, and memorization. Creativity is tolerated only within predefined limits. Independent thought, especially when it challenges core narratives, is often punished. The curriculum is not designed to foster freedom, but to produce functional citizens, people who can work, consume, and follow orders without disrupting the system. Media and technology further cement this conditioning. Every advertisement, news headline, and social post subtly tells people how to feel, what to fear, and what to desire. Algorithms curate what they see, shaping their perceptions of the world. People believe they're making free choices, but their preferences have been engineered by years of exposure to targeted stimuli. What seems spontaneous is often the result of years of subliminal nudges. Even personal identity is shaped by conditioning. Gender roles, racial narratives, religious beliefs, these are inherited more than chosen. A man raised in rural Pakistan, a woman raised in Tokyo, and a child raised in New York are all likely to grow into drastically different belief systems, not because of reason, but because of environmental immersion. The values people hold most dear often reflect their upbringing, not their free will. This conditioning is not always malevolent. It creates stability, coherence, and shared meaning. But it also limits imagination, stifles dissent, and prevents people from seeing beyond the roles assigned to them. Most choices are made within invisible boundaries, boundaries so deeply embedded that questioning them feels wrong, even dangerous. To say, "you are not free," is not to deny agency altogether. It is to point out that true freedom requires awareness of conditioning, a willingness to question inherited beliefs, to step outside programmed identities, and to confront the unknown. But very few ever take that step. They live their entire lives in a cage whose bars they cannot see, believing themselves free because the door is open, unaware that they were never the ones who built the cage. Every act of charity contains an unconscious superiority complex. Charity is often viewed as a pure and noble act, a gesture of kindness from those who have to those who don't. But beneath the surface of many charitable acts lies a hidden psychological pattern: unconscious superiority. The act of giving can create a power imbalance, positioning the giver as elevated and the receiver as diminished. Even when intentions are good, charity can reinforce hierarchies and feed the ego of the benefactor. When someone gives, they are in a position of abundance, whether financial, emotional, or intellectual. The recipient is, by contrast, in a state of lack. This dynamic automatically places the giver in the role of savior, helper, or protector. It allows them to see themselves as morally superior, not always consciously, but often subtly. The phrase, giving back, itself implies a position of elevation, as if the giver has risen above and is now bestowing help from above. This dynamic becomes even more visible in large-scale philanthropy. Billionaires who engage in charity are often praised as heroes, but their wealth was built on systems that may have contributed to the very problems they now seek to solve. Their donations buy influence, praise, and legacy, not just solutions. They get buildings named after them, articles written about them, and moral immunity from criticism. In such cases, charity becomes a transaction of status giving with one hand while ensuring admiration with the other. Even in personal relationships, charity can carry condescension. Helping a friend, mentoring a colleague, or supporting a stranger can sometimes be motivated more by the desire to feel useful than by genuine care. The act becomes a reflection of the giver's identity. I am generous, empathetic, enlightened. The receiver becomes a mirror that reflects back the giver's goodness. Nietzsche warned of this in his critique of pity. He argued that compassion often masks deeper instincts, the need to feel powerful or morally elevated. When someone pities another, they affirm their own strength in contrast. This makes pity a disguised assertion of dominance, not solidarity. None of this is to say charity is inherently bad. Acts of generosity can transform lives, but they must be approached with self-awareness. The giver must examine their motives. Am I helping because I see this person as an equal human being, or because it reinforces my identity as a good person? Am I giving freely, or am I expecting gratitude, loyalty, or admiration in return? Real charity requires humility, a recognition that the roles of giver and receiver are fluid and circumstantial. It demands that the giver dismantle their sense of moral superiority and understand that today's benefactor could be tomorrow's beggar. Otherwise, charity becomes another mask worn by the ego, a tool not for healing the world, but for elevating the self. Democracy is the tyranny of mediocrity. Democracy is widely celebrated as the most just and equitable form of government. It promises that every voice matters, that the people rule themselves, and that power is checked by consent. But beneath this noble ideal lies a brutal irony. When everyone has a voice, the loudest and most common voices tend to dominate, not the wisest. In practice, democracy often descends into a system where mediocrity rules, where the lowest common denominator becomes the guiding standard. This was a fear expressed by philosophers like Plato, who warned of ochlocracy, mob rule. He believed that the masses, driven by emotion and ignorance, were ill-equipped to make decisions about governance. Leadership, he argued, should be entrusted to those with wisdom, education, and virtue. In democracy, however, popularity often outweighs competence. Charisma trumps substance. Campaigns cater to sentiment rather than reason. The principle of one person, one vote is egalitarian on the surface, but it also means that the vote of a scientist holds the same weight as the vote of someone who rejects science entirely. Public opinion becomes a battlefield of slogans, not ideas. The marketplace of thought is not governed by truth, but by appeal. And appeal often favors simplicity, not depth. Politicians, aware of this, tailor their messages to appeal to emotions. They avoid complexity, nuance, or unpopular truths. The goal is not to lead with vision, but to win favor. As a result, democratic systems often stagnate, unable to make hard decisions or long-term plans. The mediocre rule not because they are evil, but because they are palatable. Media and entertainment amplify this trend. Mass culture flattens intellectual life into digestible bites. thoughtful discourse is replaced by soundbites and outrage. The populace becomes conditioned to expect instant gratification, to follow trends, and to fear discomfort. In such a climate, excellence is not celebrated, it is resented. The exceptional individual is seen as arrogant, elitist, or dangerous. The herd defends its own not out of malice, but out of fear. This is the tyranny of mediocrity, a system that elevates the average while suppressing the exceptional. It confuses equality of rights with equality of ability. It assumes that because all are equal before the law, all are equally qualified to lead. But democracy, when left unchecked, becomes a cult of sameness. It praises diversity of identity, but fears diversity of intellect. This is not a call for authoritarianism, but a warning. Democracy without excellence becomes decay. If merit, courage, and vision are not protected, they are drowned in the noise of the crowd. A truly free society must find a way to balance participation with discernment, or else be ruled not by the best among us, but by those who simply blend in. Desire is suffering, and life is chained to it. Arthur Schopenhauer's central philosophical insight is that desire is the root of all suffering. For him, existence itself is a ceaseless striving, and this striving is fueled by a metaphysical force he called the will. Not will in the rational or conscious sense, but a blind, irrational drive that permeates all life. Everything that lives, from the smallest insect to the human mind, is governed by this will, and the will is never satisfied. The moment we desire something, we experience lack. We become aware of what we do not have, and in that awareness lies discomfort. Desire pulls us out of the present and anchors us in longing. We become restless, agitated, discontented, and even if we achieve the object of our desire, the relief is fleeting. No sooner is one want fulfilled than another takes its place. This endless chain of wanting forms the backdrop of human existence. We live on a treadmill of pursuit, never reaching final rest. Pleasure, for Schopenhauer, is not a positive state. It is merely the temporary cessation of pain, the momentary quenching of a thirst, the brief satisfaction after a craving is met. But because the will continues to surge through us, new thirsts inevitably arise. Thus, life oscillates between desire and boredom, the pain of not having and the emptiness of having. In this cycle, true happiness is impossible. This view aligns, interestingly, with the Buddhist concept of dukkha, the inherent unsatisfactoriness of life. Both philosophies see craving as the root of suffering and view liberation as the cessation of desire. But where Buddhism offers a spiritual path out of suffering, Schopenhauer's vision is more tragic. He believed that while aesthetic experience, asceticism, and compassion might momentarily quiet the will, there is no true escape from it except through negation or death. In modern terms, this insight remains painfully relevant. Consumer culture thrives on cultivating desire. Advertisements are not about products, they are about manufacturing dissatisfaction. We are constantly told we need more money, more success, more beauty, more followers. Yet the more we get, the more we want. This isn't failure, it's by design. Capitalism depends on perpetual desire, and Schopenhauer would say that such a society is not advancing, it is accelerating the suffering inherent in life. Even love, often portrayed as transcendent, is, in Schopenhauer's eyes, a trick of the will to propagate the species. Romantic longing is one of the deepest forms of suffering because it is the will using us for its own ends, not our happiness, but reproduction. The torment, jealousy, and heartbreak we endure in love are not noble tragedies, but the painful expressions of an impersonal biological force. To understand that desire is suffering is not to become passive, but to become aware. It is to realize that peace is not found in acquiring more, but in needing less. The fewer cravings we have, the closer we come to silence, and in that silence perhaps the only kind of freedom life allows. Justice is often just revenge in slow motion. Justice is commonly depicted as blind, impartial, and noble, a system built to uphold fairness and accountability. But at its core, justice is deeply entangled with retribution. What society often calls justice may be little more than revenge, refined and delayed, institutionalized and sanitized, but revenge nonetheless. The courtroom replaces the mob, the sentence replaces the torch, and the prosecutor replaces the angry crowd. Yet the underlying impulse remains: someone must pay. Revenge is immediate and personal. It is emotional, raw, and driven by a sense of personal violation. Justice, in contrast, is procedural. It is supposed to be reasoned, dispassionate, and based on evidence. But when examined closely, many legal systems simply codify the desire for vengeance, giving it an official structure. The death penalty, life imprisonment, public shaming, these are not purely rehabilitative or deterrent acts. They are punishments, meted out not just to prevent harm, but to satisfy the moral outrage of the injured party or the public. Historically, legal systems evolved directly out of tribal retribution rituals. Early laws, like Hammurabi's Code or Roman retributive justice, were explicitly punitive, an eye for an eye. These systems sought balance through suffering. Over time, the language became more civilized, but the emotional logic remained. We still speak of paying one's debt to society, of getting what one deserves, of bringing closure, all euphemisms for the primal satisfaction of seeing the wrongdoer punished. Michel Foucault's analysis of punishment in Discipline and Punish shows how modern justice systems have not eliminated cruelty, they have relocated it. Where once bodies were broken in public squares, now minds and identities are reshaped in prisons and through surveillance. The state still exerts dominance over the body, but does so in ways that appear rational, even benevolent. But the goal is the same: to correct, to discipline, to extract a cost for disobedience. This becomes even more troubling when justice systems are biased. Structural inequalities, racial, economic, gendered, mean that justice is not blind at all. Certain groups are more likely to be accused, convicted, and punished. In such cases, justice becomes a camouflage for systemic revenge, inflicted not just on individuals but on entire communities. Even victims of crimes, when asked what they want, often say they want the perpetrator to suffer. This is not a demand for rehabilitation or reform. It is a cry for emotional restitution. The courtroom becomes the stage where that cry is answered. The language of justice may be sterile, but the outcome fulfills a deep psychological need: to see harm answered with harm. This does not mean all justice is unjust, but it means that our conception of justice must be critically examined. If the line between justice and revenge is blurred, then we must ask: are we seeking restoration or retribution? Are we healing or punishing because it feels good? The will to power drives all human behavior, not love, not reason. Friedrich Nietzsche's concept of the will to power stands as one of the most provocative and sweeping theories of human motivation. In contrast to thinkers who placed reason, pleasure, or even survival at the core of human behavior, Nietzsche argued that the deepest and most fundamental drive in all life is the will to power, not merely power over others, but the expression, expansion, and intensification of one's own being. This will to power is not about domination in the conventional sense. It is not merely political or economic. It is existential. Every act of growth, creativity, ambition, even self-discipline is an expression of the will to power. For Nietzsche, life itself is will to power, a striving not to stay safe or to be happy, but to assert, to overcome, and to become more. Love, often exalted as the highest human emotion, is not immune to this force. Love can be possessive, manipulative, and hierarchical. Even in its most romantic form, love is often about merging with the other to elevate the self, to feel whole, to overcome loneliness, to extend one's identity. Parents often project their unfulfilled dreams onto their children. Partners seek validation through the other. What masquerades as selfless devotion is frequently a form of psychological conquest, an assertion of one's will through affection. Reason, too, is a tool, not a master. Nietzsche distrusted the Enlightenment's worship of logic and objectivity. He believed that reason is often used after the fact to justify instinctive desires. We rationalize our actions with elaborate moral arguments, but the root is rarely rational. The root is, will the drive to act, to shape the world, to leave an imprint. Even philosophy, the supposed domain of pure thought, is an arena where thinkers battle to assert their vision of truth, to win disciples, to outshine rivals. Social structures are arenas for the will to power. Politics, religion, business, these are not neutral institutions. They are battlefields where different wills clash, each seeking dominance, validation, and permanence. Even altruistic movements can be infected by this drive. Revolutionaries seek not just justice, but legacy. Saints desire not just goodness, but sainthood. The will to power is pervasive, because it is not a choice, it is the essence of life asserting itself. This idea radically reframes ethics and human nature. It suggests that suppression of ambition is not virtue but fear, that humility may be a disguise for weakness, that to truly live is to embrace the struggle to fight, to fail, to rise, and to create meaning through force of will. Those who deny the will to power are not moral, they are afraid of their own potential. Understanding the will to power is not a justification for cruelty, it is a challenge to mediocrity. It asks, are you living by default, or are you actively shaping yourself and the world around you? The answer, Nietzsche believed, determines not just your fate but your worth. Society needs criminals, they help define the norms. Michel Foucault's exploration of crime and punishment reveals a striking paradox. Society cannot function without criminals. While laws are designed to discourage criminal behavior, the existence of crime is essential to reinforce those very laws. Crime, and the spectacle of its punishment, is what gives legitimacy to legal systems and moral frameworks. In this way, criminals are not just outliers, they are structural components in the architecture of social order. They help define what society considers normal. In Discipline and Punish, Foucault traced how modern institutions, prisons, courts, schools, evolved to create docile bodies, individuals who regulate themselves through fear and discipline. The criminal becomes the negative example, the cautionary tale, the contrast that justifies the norm. Without deviance, there is nothing to measure conformity against. If everyone obeyed the rules naturally, the very concept of law would collapse from lack of contrast. Criminals function as society's necessary antagonists. They make the law visible. Every trial, every headline, every punishment reinforces collective identity. We are not like them. Crime, then, isn't just a threat, it's a mirror. It reflects the values a society wants to uphold by showing what happens when those values are violated. Moreover, the figure of the criminal serves psychological and political purposes. On a psychological level, people project their own repressed desires onto criminals. The thief, the murderer, the rebel, these figures embody what society forbids but individuals secretly fantasize about. By demonizing them, individuals disown these dark impulses and reaffirm their own goodness. On a political level, the criminal can be used to justify control. Fear of crime enables the expansion of surveillance, police power, and incarceration, even when crime rates are low. This is why some theorists argue that the system reproduces crime deliberately. Poverty, inequality, and marginalization are not just unfortunate side effects, they are conditions that keep a supply of criminals in circulation. The war on drugs, for example, has disproportionately targeted the poor and minorities, creating a permanent criminal underclass that can be exploited for labor, votes, or political theater. Criminality also plays a role in cultural identity. Outlaws and rebels become folk heroes. Robin Hood, Bonnie and Clyde, and modern hackers are romanticized not because they follow the rules, but because they defy them in compelling ways. This ambivalence shows that crime is not just a legal matter, it is a cultural necessity, a way for society to explore its own contradictions. Ironically, the criminal often reveals truths that society wants to ignore. The whistleblower who leaks state secrets is technically a criminal, but morally complex. The activist who breaks unjust laws exposes the system's failings. In this sense, the criminal is both a scapegoat and a prophet, condemned for deviating from norms, but also vital to their reevaluation. Without criminals, norms would ossify. They would be taken for granted, never tested, never questioned. The criminal keeps the boundaries of behavior visible, and in doing so, keeps society coherent. Religion is mass psychological manipulation. Religion, for much of human history, has served as a central organizing force, offering explanations for existence, systems of morality, and structures of power. But when examined critically, religion can be seen not as a revelation of divine truth, but as a mechanism of psychological control, engineered to shape behavior, suppress dissent, and maintain social hierarchies. In this view, religion functions less as a spiritual guide and more as a mass manipulation device, exploiting the mind's deepest fears and desires. One of the most powerful tools religion uses is fear, particularly the fear of death and the unknown. Humans are the only species fully aware of their mortality. This awareness creates anxiety, and religion steps in to offer comforting illusions: an afterlife, divine justice, reincarnation, or transcendence. These promises are powerful because they resolve existential dread, but they also exploit vulnerability. The fear of divine punishment or hell keeps people obedient not because of moral conviction, but because of psychological coercion. Religion also manipulates through guilt. It teaches people that certain natural instincts, sexual desire, anger, pride, are sinful. By labeling core aspects of human nature as moral failings, religious systems create a perpetual inner conflict. People are made to feel broken, and then offered salvation for a price. That price is obedience, submission, ritual, tithes, and adherence to doctrine. Guilt becomes a lever that religions pull repeatedly to reinforce control. Another layer of manipulation lies in hierarchical authority. Most religious institutions are rigidly structured, with a priestly or clerical class positioned between the individual and the divine. These intermediaries interpret sacred texts, dictate moral behavior, and determine spiritual worth. The result is a dependency model, where individuals are disempowered and discouraged from direct experience or interpretation. Questioning authority becomes equated with blasphemy or heresy, an effective deterrent to independent thought. Religious narratives are also deeply tribal. They create in-groups and out-groups, believers and non-believers, the saved and the damned, the righteous and the wicked. This binary thinking fosters loyalty, but also hostility. Wars, persecution, and discrimination have all been justified in the name of God. By aligning belief with identity, religion ensures that questioning it feels like a betrayal of the self. Furthermore, religion often aligns with political power. Kings have ruled by divine right. States have enforced religious orthodoxy to unify their populations. The Church and the state, throughout history, have colluded to discipline the masses, maintain order, and quash rebellion. Even in secular democracies, religious rhetoric is used to sway voters and sanctify laws. Religion becomes a tool of governance, cloaked in sacred language. Despite modern advances in science and secularism, the psychological mechanisms of religion persist. They can be seen in cults, spiritual movements, even political ideologies that mimic religious structure. The promise of meaning, the threat of punishment, the appeal to authority, these are timeless techniques of mass influence. To call religion psychological manipulation is not necessarily to deny all spiritual insight, but it is to recognize that behind the hymns and rituals lies a system designed to control minds by shaping their deepest fears. Progress is a myth told to keep you compliant. The modern world worships the idea of progress. From technological advancement to moral enlightenment, from economic growth to social evolution, we are told that history is a steady march towards something better. But when examined critically, progress is not an objective truth. It is a myth, a narrative, designed to instill hope, suppress dissent, and justify existing systems of power. In this light, the myth of progress becomes a mechanism of compliance. The concept of progress implies that the present is superior to the past and that the future will be better still. It paints history as linear, rational, and purposeful. But history is not a straight line. It is a tangled web of regressions, contradictions, and catastrophes. The 20th century saw unprecedented scientific progress and also genocide, nuclear warfare, and ecological collapse. The same technologies that prolong life are used to automate surveillance and wage digital warfare. Progress, then, is selective. It focuses attention on certain improvements, longer life expectancy, faster communication, cleaner cities, while ignoring the costs. Environmental degradation, mental health crises, social alienation, and economic inequality are treated as side effects, not symptoms. But these are not accidental, they are the price of the system we're told to celebrate. This narrative serves a powerful psychological function. It tells people that no matter how bad things feel now, they are better than before. And if you just wait, if you just cooperate, they will get even better. This pacifies resistance. It discourages rebellion, because who would rise up against something that's always improving? Even suffering becomes part of the plan, a necessary step on the road to utopia. Governments, corporations, and ideologues use the myth of progress to validate their authority. Political leaders promise reform. Tech CEOs promise innovation. Advertisements promise a better life through consumption. These promises create the illusion of choice and empowerment while binding people to systems they can't escape. Progress becomes the carrot dangling in front of the cart, always just out of reach, but compelling enough to keep you moving. Even in education, children are taught that society is on an upward trajectory, that we are wiser than our ancestors, more moral than past generations. This instills complacency and historical arrogance. It blinds people to the failures of the present and the wisdom of the past. It replaces inquiry with faith not in God, but in the future. Progress is not always a lie, but the myth of inevitable progress is. It assumes that improvement is automatic, that history has a direction, and that technology equals virtue. These are illusions. Real progress, if it exists, is fragile, reversible, and deeply contested. To question the myth is not to embrace despair, but to awaken from sedation. Because sometimes what is called progress is simply the soft hum of machinery keeping you asleep. Suffering is the core of existence. Arthur Schopenhauer's philosophy begins and ends with one brutal premise: life is suffering. Unlike optimistic worldviews that treat pain as an occasional detour in an otherwise meaningful journey, Schopenhauer placed suffering at the very center of existence. In his magnum opus The World as Will and Representation, he argues that suffering is not an anomaly, it is the very condition of being alive. The root of this suffering lies in what he calls the will to live, an irrational, blind, ceaseless drive that underlies all life. It compels us to survive, reproduce, conquer, and consume. This will is never satisfied. The moment one desire is fulfilled, another emerges to take its place. And in this endless cycle of longing, we are trapped. To exist is to want, and to want is to lack. Every lack is a kind of pain. Pleasure, in this view, is not a true positive experience. It is simply the temporary suspension of suffering. A hungry person eats and feels relief, but that relief is short-lived and always followed by new forms of discomfort. Even moments of happiness are fleeting, overshadowed by the anxiety of losing them. The deeper the joy, the sharper the fear of its disappearance. Thus, even pleasure is tainted by the shadow of suffering. This pessimistic view might seem extreme, but it resonates across many traditions. Buddhism, for example, begins with the first noble truth. Life is dukkha, a word often translated as suffering or dissatisfaction. Both Schopenhauer and the Buddha saw desire as the source of our torment. The more we crave status, love, wealth, permanence, the more we are tormented by change, loss, and impermanence. Biologically, suffering is built into our bodies. Hunger, illness, aging, and death are inevitable. Psychologically, suffering is just as persistent: anxiety, grief, jealousy, boredom, and existential dread. The human mind, uniquely self-aware, turns pain inward. We suffer not just in the moment, but in memory and in anticipation. Our capacity for reflection deepens our wounds. Societies attempt to mask this with distraction, consumerism, entertainment, social media, but none of it erases the fundamental truth. Suffering leaks through the cracks. We medicate, we spiritualize, we pretend. But beneath the surface, the question persists: why must life hurt so much? Schopenhauer believed the only true relief comes from renouncing the will, quieting the endless craving that fuels suffering. Through asceticism, art, and contemplation, one might temporarily escape the tyranny of desire. But there is no final liberation this side of death. Life as it is offers no ultimate redemption, only varying degrees of torment. To confront this is not to fall into despair, but to strip away illusion. It is to see the world not as we wish it to be, but as it truly is. In that brutal clarity lies a strange form of freedom, not from suffering itself, but from the lie that suffering is a mistake. There is no self to improve, only an illusion to rearrange. The idea of the self is perhaps the most persistent illusion in human consciousness. We are taught to believe in a stable identity, a core I that exists behind our eyes, directing thoughts, making decisions, evolving over time. Self-help culture is built entirely on this premise, that the self is a thing we can fix, enhance, purify, or fulfill. But what if this self is not real? What if the person you think you are is just a collection of habits, memories, and social scripts, a mirage constructed by language and reinforced by repetition? This radical idea is found in both ancient and modern philosophy. In Buddhism, the doctrine of anatta, non-self, teaches that the self is an illusion, a mental fabrication born from clinging and ignorance. In the West, thinkers like David Hume and Michel Foucault echoed this skepticism. Hume could find no self in his introspection, only a bundle of perceptions. Foucault went further, arguing that the self is a discursive product, shaped by power, institutions, and historical forces. If the self is not a fixed entity but a shifting constellation of inputs, then what exactly are we trying to improve when we engage in self-help? What we call personal growth may in fact be rearranging the illusion, swapping one socially acceptable identity for another. Today's self-improvement is often just a better mask, a more optimized performance of what society deems acceptable or admirable. Even our memories central to our sense of self are unreliable. They are not static records but malleable stories, influenced by current emotions, narratives, and feedback from others. Our personality traits, too, fluctuate depending on context. We behave differently at work, at home, in solitude, or among friends. There is no true self. Beneath these layers, only roles that shift to meet the moment. This realization destabilizes much of what we believe about life purpose, morality, and identity. It challenges the cult of authenticity, which assumes there is a real you waiting to be uncovered. But if the self is a fiction, then authenticity becomes a game of selective storytelling. Even introspection, the act of knowing yourself, is recursive. Who is doing the observing? What part of the self judges the rest? None of this means we are powerless. It simply means that transformation does not require preserving a core because there is none. Instead of becoming your best self, perhaps the goal is to become more aware of the scripts you're following, more agile in rewriting them, and more compassionate toward the chaos that underlies it all. To improve the self is not to polish some eternal essence, it is to navigate a swirling, ever-shifting process of becoming. and in that perhaps there is more possibility than limitation. Good and evil are just names slapped onto what the strong or weak approve of. The concepts of good and evil carry immense moral weight. They guide laws, religions, wars, and personal behavior. But when we peel back the layers of history and power, these categories reveal themselves as labels, not absolutes, as tools used by different groups to assert control, justify actions, and shape perception. What one culture calls evil, another may call heroic. What one era celebrates as virtue, another may condemn as atrocity. These terms are not universal truths, they are judgments rooted in perspective, power, and context. Friedrich Nietzsche's analysis of morality exposes the instability of these moral categories. He distinguishes between master morality and slave morality. Master morality arises from the strong individuals or classes who define good based on power, nobility, pride, and life affirmation. In this system, good is what enhances vitality and strength. Bad is simply weakness. Slave morality, on the other hand, is born from resentment. The powerless, unable to match the strength of the ruling class, redefine morality to favor their condition. In this reversal, humility becomes good and power becomes evil. This shift is not moral evolution, it's a power struggle disguised as ethics. The morality that dominates society at any given time reflects the interests of those in charge. Religious institutions declared certain behaviors evil not because they were inherently wrong, but because they threatened institutional control. States have labeled dissidents, traitors, and rebels terrorists, not because of some universal evil, but because their actions challenged established order. Even within individuals, moral labeling is selective. We often excuse our own behavior while condemning the same acts in others. A lie told to protect a loved one feels good. A lie told to us by an adversary feels evil. Our application of good and evil is situational, emotional, and tribal. We judge based on loyalty, threat, and context, not absolute reason. History is filled with shifting moral judgments. Slavery, once justified by religious and legal codes, is now seen as one of humanity's greatest evils. Homosexuality was criminalized for centuries and is now embraced in many parts of the world as an expression of love. These reversals demonstrate that morality is not fixed. It is constructed, negotiated, and rewritten. This doesn't mean that morality is meaningless. It means that moral claims should be treated as assertions of power, not declarations of objective truth. When someone calls something evil, we should ask, who benefits from this label? Who is silenced by it? What worldview does it reinforce? To understand that good and evil are contingent is not to embrace nihilism. It is to move beyond moral absolutism and see the underlying forces at play. In a world of competing values, the strongest don't just win battles, they define the very terms of the fight, and the weak, in turn, craft their own moral systems to reclaim dignity. In the end, good and evil are linguistic armor used to protect what we already believe and to attack what we fear. Pleasure is merely the temporary absence of pain. Arthur Schopenhauer's bleak view of the human condition hinges on the idea that what we call pleasure is not a true positive experience, but merely a brief respite from the default state of pain. In his metaphysical framework, life is fundamentally driven by lack, a ceaseless striving, yearning, and desiring. To exist is to want. Every desire is a form of discomfort, and fulfilling that desire merely eliminates the discomfort, without delivering anything intrinsically pleasurable in itself. For Schopenhauer, satisfaction is an illusion. When a person is hungry and eats, they may describe the experience as pleasurable, but in truth, the pleasure is nothing more than the relief of hunger, the quieting of a biological alarm. The same goes for thirst, fatigue, loneliness, or boredom. Once the need is temporarily sated, the suffering subsides, but only until the next desire arises. The wheel keeps turning. The human condition is not one of pleasure punctuated by suffering, but of suffering briefly interrupted by relief. This insight turns the modern pursuit of happiness on its head. Society teaches us to chase pleasure through consumption, achievement, intimacy, stimulation, as if it were a stable, attainable state. But if pleasure is always conditional upon the removal of pain, then it is inherently reactive, not proactive. We aren't creating joy, we're simply fighting discomfort, again and again. Pleasure is also inherently fleeting. The moment a need is fulfilled, it begins to lose its grip on us. The delicious meal becomes mundane once our hunger fades. The romance that once thrilled begins to dull as familiarity sets in. The vacation, the promotion, the thrill, all fade. Hedonic adaptation ensures that what once pleased us becomes the new normal, prompting yet another cycle of craving. This means that the pursuit of pleasure is self-defeating. The more we chase it, the more elusive it becomes. This realization can be deeply unsettling. If pleasure is not a source of lasting happiness, what is left? For Schopenhauer, the answer lay not in chasing new highs, but in minimizing suffering. The wise life is not the one filled with excitement, but the one stripped of unnecessary torment. This leads to a philosophy of asceticism, aesthetic contemplation, and quiet detachment, a turning away from the will, rather than its indulgence. Modern psychology echoes this insight in unexpected ways. Studies show that people often feel most at peace not during ecstatic joy, but during flow states, where desire and ego momentarily dissolve. Peace, not pleasure, may be the true antidote to suffering. But that peace is fragile, easily shattered by the next wave of desire. To call pleasure the absence of pain is to rob it of its glamorous veneer. It becomes not a reward, but a pause in the ongoing tension of existence. And in that pause, brief though it may be, we glimpse the quiet truth Schopenhauer laid bare, that what we call joy is often just the silence that follows a scream. What we call sanity is often submission to the dominant narrative. Sanity is typically seen as a medical or psychological category, the baseline of cognitive normality. To be sane is to be rational, coherent, functional. But this seemingly objective category becomes deeply questionable when viewed through the lens of Michel Foucault and other critics of institutional power. What if sanity is not a universal truth, but a social contract? What if sanity, like morality, is defined by those who hold power and enforced by the systems they control? In Madness and Civilization, Foucault explored the historical treatment of the insane, showing that the line between madness and reason was culturally constructed. Those who deviated from social norms, mystics, rebels, nonconformists, sexual deviants, were often labeled mad not because of any clinical diagnosis, but because they threatened the established order. Sanity, in this sense, became a tool of exclusion, a way to marginalize those who disrupted the dominant narrative. To be sane is often to agree with the majority, or more precisely, with the institutions that define acceptable thought. The state, religion, academia, psychiatry, and media all collaborate to define what counts as rational, but rationality is not a neutral standard. It is embedded with cultural, political, and economic assumptions. What is logical in one era or culture may be heretical in another. This becomes clear when examining how dissidents are treated. Whistleblowers, prophets, visionaries, people who speak uncomfortable truths are frequently dismissed as paranoid, unstable, or mentally ill. Their refusal to conform is interpreted not as bravery or insight, but as a symptom. Their language is labeled incoherent, their behavior erratic. In this framework, disagreement becomes pathology. Sanity also aligns with economic utility. The sane person is productive, punctual, socially agreeable. They work, pay taxes, obey laws, consume responsibly. Anyone who struggles to fit this mold due to depression, anxiety, trauma, or nonconformist values risks being labeled mentally unwell. The criteria for sanity, then, are not just psychological, but socio-economic. The mind must be aligned not only with truth, but with capitalism and compliance. This does not mean mental illness is a fiction, but it does mean that diagnoses are shaped by culture. Homosexuality was once listed as a disorder. Women who resisted domestic roles were diagnosed with hysteria. Slaves who tried to escape were labeled as having drapetomania. These examples show that psychiatry has historically been used to enforce norms, not just to heal. In everyday life, sanity becomes a matter of language. To speak too emotionally, too spiritually, too critically, especially about power, is to risk being called unhinged. To stay silent, polite, and aligned with the status quo is to remain comfortably within the borders of the sane. But in doing so, one may lose access to deeper truths. Sanity, then, is often the reward for submission. It is granted to those who accept the dominant narrative, who don't ask forbidden questions, who stay within the prescribed limits of behavior and thought. The cost of sanity is often freedom itself. Culture is a cage built with beautiful bars. Culture is often celebrated as a source of identity, creativity, and meaning. It gives us language, art, customs, values, and rituals, a sense of belonging. But beneath its vibrant surface lies a more troubling truth. Culture is also a mechanism of control, a framework that defines the limits of what we can think, say, and become. It is a cage not made of steel or iron, but of ideas, and its bars are adorned with the symbols we cherish most. From birth, individuals are immersed in culture. It dictates the language they speak, the holidays they celebrate, the clothes they wear, and the roles they are expected to play. None of this is chosen freely. A child born into a religious society will likely inherit that religion. A girl raised in a patriarchal culture may internalize submission as virtue. A boy in a militaristic nation may glorify war. What feels natural is often just deeply conditioned familiarity. The danger of culture is not in its content, but in its invisibility. It shapes perception so thoroughly that it becomes mistaken for truth. People don't just live in culture, they think through it. Their sense of right and wrong, normal and strange, valuable and worthless, is filtered through cultural norms. Culture defines the boundaries of imagination. Outside those boundaries lies the unthinkable. Even rebellion is often absorbed by culture. Countercultures are quickly commodified. Punk rock becomes fashion. Revolutionary ideas become academic theory. Once culture identifies a threat, it often repackages it, neutralizing its force by integrating it into the very system it challenged. In this way, culture is adaptive and self-preserving. The beauty of culture is part of the trap. Its music, art, poetry, and mythology evoke deep emotion. These aesthetics offer comfort and transcendence, but they also distract from constraint. People become so enamored with cultural expression that they stop questioning its underlying rules. They celebrate the beauty of the cage, forgetting that it is a cage. Culture also reinforces social hierarchy. It distinguishes the elite from the common, the insider from the outsider, the civilized from the savage. Through language, etiquette, and tradition, culture draws lines of inclusion and exclusion. It becomes a gatekeeper of status, legitimacy, and power. The cultured are granted authority. The uncultured are silenced. Michel Foucault and Pierre Bourdieu both examined how culture operates as a subtle force of domination. Power doesn't need to impose itself through violence when it can shape what people love, fear, and value. The most effective control is that which is internalized when people police themselves through inherited beliefs. To live within culture is inescapable, but to live unconsciously within it is to remain caged. The challenge is not to reject culture wholesale, which is impossible, but to see it clearly. To recognize which bars are beautiful and which are blinding, because only then can one begin to move within the cage with awareness, or perhaps bend the bars. Power creates knowledge, not the other way around. In traditional thought, knowledge is often seen as neutral, the result of observation, reason, and evidence. It's imagined as a pursuit that exists independently of politics or ideology, leading us ever closer to truth. Michel Foucault, however, radically reversed this view. He argued that knowledge does not exist outside of power, that it is shaped, produced, and legitimized by systems of control. In his formulation, power precedes knowledge, and every claim to truth must be examined through the lens of who benefits from its acceptance. This is not a conspiracy theory, it's a structural insight. Institutions that produce knowledge, schools, universities, medical establishments, legal systems, are never neutral. They are embedded in historical, political, and economic contexts. They decide what counts as legitimate knowledge, who gets to speak, and what questions are worth asking. These decisions are not merely academic, they reinforce hierarchies. A society's dominant knowledge reflects the values and interests of its ruling class. Take, for example, psychiatry. The classification of mental illness has changed dramatically over time, not just due to new discoveries, but in response to shifting cultural norms and pressures. Homosexuality was once labeled a mental disorder. Women expressing dissatisfaction with domestic roles were diagnosed with hysteria. These facts were not based solely on biology or data, they were expressions of the normative power structures of their times. Foucault referred to this dynamic as power, knowledge, an inseparable bond. Knowledge is a tool of governance. It organizes people, categorizes them, labels them. It makes society legible to institutions, enabling surveillance, control, and correction. For instance, the modern prison system operates not just through bars and guards but through discourses of criminality, rehabilitation, and risk assessment, all forms of institutional knowledge that allow the system to justify itself. Science, often upheld as the pinnacle of objectivity, is also entangled with power. What research gets funded, who conducts it, who publishes it, and in which journals? These are not purely epistemological questions, they are political. Climate science was suppressed by oil interests. Pharmaceutical companies shape medical guidelines. Academic freedom can be constrained by economic or ideological interests. Knowledge that threatens dominant power is often marginalized, discredited, or ignored. This view also explains why some truths are unthinkable. A society built on exploitation must suppress or reframe knowledge that challenges its foundations. Colonial empires presented their domination as a civilizing mission. Modern democracies frame economic inequality as the result of meritocratic competition. These narratives are forms of knowledge that power creates stories we are trained to accept as common sense. To understand that power creates knowledge is to become skeptical of claims that present themselves as purely factual. It does not mean all knowledge is false, but that all knowledge is situated born from a context, shaped by authority, and used to organize the world in specific ways. Critical thinking, then, is not just about logic. It is about asking, whose truth is this? Who gains from this knowledge being accepted as fact? Human life has no inherent value. The assertion that human life has no inherent value is among the most unsettling ideas in philosophy, but also one of the most honest. This perspective does not suggest that life is worthless, but that value is not embedded in life by default. It is not granted by nature, the universe, or any divine entity. Instead, value is something we assign, often arbitrarily, emotionally, or politically. To say life is inherently valuable is to assume a cosmic affirmation that simply doesn't exist. From a biological standpoint, humans are one species among millions. We are not more important than ants, whales, or viruses in any objective sense. We reproduce, consume, and die like all other life forms. Nature does not distinguish between noble and vile, meaningful and meaningless, it simply functions. Hurricanes destroy humans without remorse. Disease takes children and tyrants alike. The universe is silent on the question of human worth. Religious traditions try to solve this by claiming that humans are made in the image of God or imbued with immortal souls. But these are human stories, myths crafted to reduce existential dread. They place mankind at the center of the cosmos and offer comfort in the face of mortality. Yet these beliefs, when unexamined, lead to anthropocentrism, the assumption that human needs override all else, and to the dangerous idea that our lives are sacred regardless of our actions. This illusion is further reinforced by legal and political systems. Human rights documents declare that all people are born with inalienable dignity and worth. But in practice, societies rank human lives constantly. A celebrity's death is headline news. 1,000 faceless deaths in a war zone are statistics. Refugees drown without outrage, while domestic tragedies evoke nationwide mourning. This inconsistency reveals that human value is socially constructed, not metaphysically guaranteed. Even within our personal lives, we imbue some lives with great meaning and others with indifference. A stranger on the other side of the world is not as valuable to us as a friend or family member. Our empathy is selective and tribal, not universal. This emotional economy undermines any claim to objective, universal human worth. For thinkers like Schopenhauer and Nietzsche, this lack of inherent value is not a cause for despair, but a challenge. If life has no intrinsic worth, then the burden of meaning falls on us. We are not born with value, we must create it. Through art, love, struggle, rebellion, or creativity, humans can imbue their lives with subjective significance. But this meaning is always precarious, contingent, and deeply personal. The absence of inherent value also invites ethical humility. It forces us to treat value as a choice, not a birthright. It encourages compassion not because life is sacred, but because life is fragile and brief. It is the emptiness of the canvas that gives us the power and responsibility to paint it. Most relationships are veiled power plays. Relationships are often idealized as expressions of love, connection, and mutual understanding. But when stripped of their sentimentality, many relationships reveal themselves to be structured by power, even the most intimate ones. Whether romantic, familial, professional, or platonic, relationships frequently involve a struggle for dominance, control, influence, or validation. This struggle may be subtle, unconscious, or unspoken, but it is present, shaping the dynamic at every turn. In romantic relationships, power manifests in emotional leverage. One partner might care more, making them more vulnerable. The other may hold more financial stability, social capital, or perceived desirability. These imbalances create unspoken hierarchies. Acts of love, while genuine, can be tools of negotiation expressed or withheld to maintain advantage. Who texts first? Who apologizes? Who makes the decisions? These micro-moves often reflect deeper battles for control. Even expressions of affection can become strategic. A compliment may be sincere, but it can also be a way to manipulate mood or gain favor. Generosity might be tied to expectation. Forgiveness may carry a subtle price. These aren't signs of malice, but of how deeply entangled love is with power. True equality in relationships is aspirational, rare, difficult, and often unstable. Most people oscillate between dominance and submission, depending on circumstance. In family systems, power is embedded in roles: the authoritative parent, the rebellious child, the passive sibling. Parents use guilt, expectation, and tradition to shape their children. Children learn to manipulate parents through behavior, silence, or rebellion. The illusion of unconditional love masks a complex network of psychological contracts. You owe me respect. I gave you everything. You disappoint me. These statements are not just emotional, they are claims of power. Friendships, too, are rarely immune. Social groups develop hierarchies. Some friends lead, others follow. There are unspoken rules about who hosts, who listens, who initiates. People may remain in friendships not out of love, but out of fear of exclusion, social obligation, or nostalgia. Passive aggression, sarcasm, or silence can be tools of indirect control. Even vulnerability can become a currency used to elicit sympathy or maintain emotional superiority. In professional relationships, the power dynamic is overt. Bosses, managers, mentors, they wield influence over livelihood and future. But even among peers, there are games. Praise is used to align or manipulate. Competition is cloaked in camaraderie. People trade favors, information, and loyalty to advance status. Behind the smiles and handshakes, dominance hierarchies quietly dictate behavior. Foucault taught that power is not merely held, it is exercised, exchanged, diffused. In relationships, power is not always oppressive. It can be fluid, consensual, even erotic. But denying its presence creates a dangerous blindness. The healthiest relationships are not those free of power, but those where power is acknowledged, negotiated, and respected. To see relationships as veiled power plays is not to devalue them, but to understand them. Love and power are not opposites, they are often entwined. When we pretend otherwise, we don't protect love, we corrupt it. Your suffering doesn't make you special, it just makes you human. Modern culture often elevates suffering to the status of identity. People wear their pain like badges of honor, believing that their trauma or hardship entitles them to special treatment, validation, or moral authority. While it's true that suffering can shape character and foster empathy, the assumption that it makes someone unique or exceptional is a dangerous illusion. Suffering is not extraordinary, it is universal. Every human being, regardless of age, status, or virtue, experiences pain. What varies is only the form, not the presence, of suffering. Suffering is the common denominator of existence. The poor suffer from scarcity. The rich suffer from emptiness. The young suffer from inexperience. The old suffer from decline. Lovers suffer from longing. The lonely suffer from isolation. The forms are infinite, but the condition is shared. From birth to death, life is filled with struggle, disappointment, and loss. Even moments of joy are shadowed by impermanence, the knowledge that nothing lasts. To believe that your suffering makes you special is to fall into narcissism of pain. It creates a sense of entitlement that because you've been hurt, others should cater to you, forgive your flaws, or prioritize your voice. But this mindset isolates rather than connects. It turns suffering into a competition where empathy is replaced by performative grievance. People begin to compare scars rather than heal them. This illusion is fueled by cultural forces. Social media encourages people to broadcast their struggles in exchange for attention. Therapy language becomes a tool for self-justification. Victimhood, rather than resilience, is rewarded. The problem is not that people express pain, it's that they begin to believe pain makes them morally superior or more real than others. But suffering is not a credential. It is a condition of being alive. The fact that you hurt does not make you profound, brave, or important, it makes you human. Everyone has a private war. Everyone carries grief, shame, regret, or fear. The more you cling to your pain as proof of identity, the more you risk getting stuck in it, defining yourself by what was done to you rather than what you choose to do next. This doesn't mean pain should be dismissed or minimized, but it should be decentralized. The path to growth lies not in clinging to suffering, but in learning to carry it with grace, to integrate it without letting it define you. True strength lies in acknowledging pain without becoming it. When you realize suffering is not unique but shared, compassion becomes possible. You stop comparing wounds and start seeing others as fellow travelers. Your suffering is valid, but it does not elevate you. It connects you. It strips away illusion and pride, exposing the raw truth of what it means to be alive. And in that truth, paradoxically, lies the potential for real transformation, not because you are special, but because you are not. Enlightenment is not peace, it is detachment from illusions. Enlightenment is often misunderstood as a state of eternal bliss, a serene oasis where suffering ends and joy flows effortlessly. But this is a romanticized distortion. In many philosophical and spiritual traditions, particularly Buddhism and certain strains of existential thought, enlightenment is not about comfort or ecstasy. It is about clarity, the piercing realization that much of what we believe, chase, and fear is an illusion. Enlightenment is not peace in the conventional sense. It is the detachment that comes from seeing reality as it truly is. At the heart of illusion lies the ego, the belief in a fixed, permanent I that must be defended, praised, fulfilled, or completed. This ego constructs stories. I am this kind of person. I must succeed. I will be happy when. These narratives generate desire and fear, attachment and aversion. We cling to identities, relationships, goals, and possessions, believing they will grant us wholeness, but all are transient. The self is not a solid core, but a fluctuating process, a collection of memories, habits, perceptions, and reactions. Enlightenment reveals this, and it's disorienting. To become enlightened is to experience the crumbling of illusions that once gave life structure. The illusion of permanence dissolves. So does the illusion of control. The idea that the universe owes you meaning, fairness, or satisfaction is exposed as wishful thinking. In its place is a raw, unfiltered reality, unpredictable, impermanent, and indifferent. This detachment is not nihilism, it is freedom. When you no longer chase illusions, you are no longer bound by them. You don't stop feeling, but you stop being ruled by feelings. You don't stop thinking, but you stop identifying with thoughts. You live, but without the desperate clinging to outcomes. Pain still comes, but without the added suffering of resistance. Joy still visits, but without the fear of its loss. This is not peace in the comforting sense. It is liberation through deconstruction. Enlightenment also exposes the illusions society builds. Nationalism, status, religion, tradition, all are frameworks built on shared belief. They offer identity, purpose, and community, but they also limit vision. They turn fluid reality into rigid categories. Enlightenment unravels these constructs, revealing that much of what we consider real is just agreed upon fiction. Those who attain glimpses of enlightenment are often seen as detached or even alien. They operate from a place outside the drama of ordinary life. They may seem serene, but their serenity is not softness. It is born of confrontation. They have stared into the void and emerged, not with answers, but with non-attachment. To seek enlightenment is not to pursue peace, but to surrender illusion. It is not a path to feel better, but to see better, and in seeing clearly, to be unchained. History is the propaganda of the winners. History, as taught in schools and written in textbooks, often masquerades as objective truth, a chronological record of events. But behind the dates and names lies a fundamental bias. History is written by the victors. This is not just a cynical aphorism, it is a structural reality. Those who win wars, overthrow governments, or dominate economies gain the power to shape how events are remembered and, more importantly, how they are justified. The victors control the narrative. They decide which battles were heroic, which leaders were visionary, which ideologies were righteous. They write history in a way that casts their actions as necessary, moral, or inevitable. At the same time, the voices of the defeated are marginalized, erased, or vilified. Losers are called rebels, terrorists, traitors, or savages. Their stories are either forgotten or twisted to fit the prevailing myth. This process is not limited to military conquest. Economic and cultural domination shapes historical memory just as effectively. Colonial powers portrayed themselves as civilizers. Capitalist nations framed their rise as the triumph of freedom. Religious empires depict their expansion as divine will. These stories become entrenched, not because they are true, but because they serve the interests of those in power. The mechanisms of historical control are vast. Governments fund certain kinds of education. Monuments are erected to glorify selected figures. Museums curate artifacts that reinforce national identity. Films and media dramatize specific events while ignoring others. Even silence is a tool. What isn't taught, what isn't discussed, becomes invisible. Revisionist history. The attempt to reinterpret past events is often dismissed as dangerous or unpatriotic. But all history is revisionist. Each generation rewrites the past through its current lens. What was once accepted becomes controversial. What was once suppressed resurfaces. The fight over history is a fight over meaning and identity. The most dangerous thing about winner-written history is that it creates false closure. It tells us that the story is over, that justice was done, that progress was made. But many of the wounds left by conquest, genocide, slavery, and exploitation remain open. The myths of triumph mask the ongoing consequences: displacement, inequality, cultural erasure. This understanding doesn't mean abandoning history. It means approaching it with critical consciousness. It means asking, whose perspective is missing? What voices were silenced? What truths were inconvenient to power? It also means recognizing that every historical account is a construction shaped by selection, omission, and emphasis. History is not just about the past. It is a battlefield of interpretation. It shapes how societies understand themselves, who they celebrate, what they fear, and what they aspire to. The victors may write the first draft, but that draft can, and must, be challenged. Because as long as history is propaganda, it serves the present, not the truth. People cling to beliefs, not because they're true, but because they're useful. Beliefs are not primarily adopted for their truth value. They are adopted, more often than not, because they serve a purpose. A belief that brings psychological comfort, social cohesion, or personal advantage will be clung to with far more tenacity than a belief that merely reflects reality. This is not a flaw of character. It is a function of how the human mind is wired. People gravitate toward what makes life livable, not necessarily what makes it accurate. Beliefs provide structure. In a chaotic world, they act like a scaffolding, giving form and narrative to a formless existence. Whether it's religious doctrine, political ideology, or personal identity, belief systems simplify a world that would otherwise be overwhelming. They offer certainty where there is ambiguity, meaning where there is randomness, and direction where there is confusion. The truth is often complex, uncomfortable, and fluid. A useful belief is usually the opposite: clear, comforting, and fixed. Psychologically, beliefs help regulate emotions. Someone grieving a loss may adopt the belief in an afterlife, not because they've evaluated the evidence and concluded it must exist, but because it soothes their pain. A person facing injustice might believe that everything happens for a reason because it reduces the sting of powerlessness. These beliefs may be false or unverifiable, but their utility overrides their accuracy. Socially, beliefs bind people into communities. Shared beliefs create in-groups and reinforce identity. To question the belief is to risk social exclusion, a powerful deterrent. People often cling to beliefs they don't fully understand or even believe, just to avoid the consequences of dissent. This is why political polarization often resists logic. Beliefs become tribal flags, not truth statements. They signify loyalty more than they convey facts. Cognitive dissonance also plays a role. Once a person has invested time, emotion, or identity into a belief, abandoning it would mean admitting they were wrong. This internal cost can be unbearable. So instead, they double down. They seek confirming evidence, dismiss contradictions, and interpret neutral facts through the lens of what they already know. In this way, the usefulness of a belief isn't just psychological, it becomes existential. People feel that they need the belief in order to hold themselves together. This doesn't mean all beliefs are false. Some beliefs happen to be both useful and true, but truth is rarely the sole criterion for belief adoption or retention. The mind is pragmatic, not objective. It asks, does this belief help me survive, function, belong, feel better? Truth often comes last, if at all. Understanding this is both liberating and terrifying. It means our convictions are not necessarily the products of reason, but of need. It means we must constantly interrogate why we believe what we believe and whether the belief is grounded in truth or simply protecting us from it. The strong create meaning. The weak borrow it. Meaning is not something that exists in the world like gravity or atoms. It is not discovered, it is created. Life, in its rawest form, is indifferent. It offers no inherent purpose, no divine instruction. Faced with this blank canvas, some shrink back and borrow meaning from others' religions, ideologies, family, tradition. Others rise to the challenge and forge meaning from within. The difference lies in strength, not physical strength, but existential strength. The strong do not wait to be told who they are. They do not beg the universe for clarity. They confront the chaos of existence and assert, "This is what I choose to stand for. This is what I will build. This is how I will live." Their meaning is self-authored. It is not handed down, it is crafted through suffering, reflection, and will. Nietzsche called this the difference between the master and the slave modes of valuation. The strong, the masters, create values from the inside out. They define what is good based on what affirms their vitality, creativity, and power. The weak, the slaves, define good based on what protects them, what comforts them, what helps them cope. The strong turn their struggle into a narrative of overcoming. The weak turn theirs into a badge of victimhood. Borrowed meaning feels safe. It provides a script. You don't have to decide what's right, your priest, party, or peer group already has. You don't have to wrestle with ambiguity, the answers are printed in a holy book or shouted in slogans. But this comfort comes at a cost. You are not the author of your life, you're merely reading someone else's script. You live by default, not by design. The strong reject this passivity. They face the terror of freedom, the fact that meaning is not given, and thus must be made. They embrace the burden of authorship. This is not arrogance, it is responsibility. They understand that to live authentically means to take the raw material of life's suffering, joy, failure, love, and shape it into a coherent whole. That process is painful, uncertain, and slow. But it is real. To borrow meaning is to live secondhand. To create meaning is to live originally. The strong are willing to be wrong, to change, to rebuild. The weak cling to dogma because they fear collapse. But the irony is that borrowed meaning cannot save you when it matters most. In crisis, repetition of someone else's truth rings hollow. Only a meaning forged in your own fire can withstand the storm. The difference is not elitist, it is existential. To create meaning is to stand alone in the void and declare, "I will not be shaped, I will shape." That is the burden of the strong. Hope is the cruelest of all delusions. Hope is often praised as a virtue, a light in the darkness, a lifeline in despair. But under closer scrutiny, hope reveals itself not as a solution, but as a subtle torment. It dangles the possibility of better days just out of reach, keeping people tethered to futures that may never come. It delays acceptance, distorts perception, and perpetuates suffering. In this sense, hope is not noble, it is cruel. Arthur Schopenhauer saw hope as a trick played by the will to live. It keeps people striving, dreaming, and struggling, even when reason suggests there is no reason to continue. It promises relief, but never delivers it fully. Every time one hope is fulfilled, another emerges. The cycle continues, fueled by the illusion that one day, finally, things will align. But life is not structured that way. Disappointment is not the exception, it is the rule. Hope feeds on future fantasies. It pulls consciousness away from the present and anchors it in hypotheticals. Once I have this job, once they love me, once I'm healed. But the present is the only place where life actually occurs. Hope encourages people to postpone living, to endure the now in service of the maybe. And when the hoped-for outcome fails to materialize, the pain is deeper, not just because of the loss, but because of the betrayal of belief. Politically, hope is a tool of control. Leaders and institutions invoke hope to neutralize unrest. Things will get better, they say. Change is coming. Hope pacifies. It makes people endure injustice longer than they should. It keeps them voting for the system that oppresses them, praying to gods that do not answer, working jobs that grind them down. Revolutions don't begin when people are hopeless. They begin when people stop waiting for change and demand it. Religiously, hope is used to postpone existential reckoning. The idea of heaven, karma, or a better afterlife seduces people into tolerating hell on earth. The poor are told to suffer with grace. The sick are told their pain has meaning. The dying are told not to fear, salvation is near. Hope anesthetizes, it softens the hard truths of death, injustice, and impermanence. But it does so by promoting delusion. Even in personal life, hope can prevent healing. Hoping that a toxic person will change keeps you trapped. Hoping that your depression will magically lift without action prolongs despair. Hope becomes a form of denial, a refusal to confront the reality of now. It tells you to keep waiting when what you need is to act or let go. This does not mean despair is preferable. It means that clarity is preferable. Instead of hope, seek presence. Instead of fantasizing about rescue, build resilience. Replace hope with realism, acceptance, and intention. True peace comes not from expecting better days, but from no longer needing them. Because when you stop hoping, you stop hurting for what isn't and begin dealing with what is. You are not who you think you are who society needs you to be. The self is often seen as something deeply personal, an internal identity forged by unique thoughts, emotions, and experiences. But this romantic idea of the autonomous individual crumbles under critical examination. Most people are not the authors of their own identity. They are constructs, carefully shaped by social systems, norms, and expectations. Who you think you are is usually a refined performance, calibrated to meet what society rewards and avoids what it punishes. You are, in large part, who society needs you to be. From the moment you're born, society begins molding you. You're assigned a name, gender, religion, and nationality before you take your first breath. As you grow, you are told what is acceptable and what is not, what boys and girls should be, how to speak, what to wear, when to smile, when to stay quiet. You're praised for compliance and corrected for deviation. These early instructions aren't suggestions, they're programming. The reward is belonging. The cost of refusal is exclusion. Education enforces this further. Schools don't just teach math and language, they teach how to sit still, how to follow instructions, how to submit to authority, and how to compete for approval. Students learn what answers are right, not necessarily what is true. Creativity is encouraged only within limits. Originality is celebrated only when it can be graded. Through repeated exposure to this system, children adapt. They begin to suppress parts of themselves that don't fit the mold and amplify those that earn validation. As adults, people continue to play roles: worker, parent, spouse, citizen. Each role comes with a script. At work, you're expected to be productive and agreeable. At home, nurturing or responsible. On social media, positive and likable. The pressure to perform becomes internalized. Most people forget they're acting. The mask fuses with the skin. The illusion of a stable self persists because it's reinforced constantly. You believe you're making choices, but your preferences are influenced by advertising, social circles, algorithms, and inherited values. You think you're being yourself, but in reality, you're navigating a social economy, managing impressions, reputations, and relationships based on the feedback loops of acceptance and rejection. Michel Foucault's notion of the disciplined subject captures this well. Modern power doesn't just operate through coercion, it shapes identity itself. People become docile not by force, but by learning to see themselves through the eyes of authority. They monitor and correct their behavior, thoughts, and even feelings, long before anyone else intervenes. This doesn't mean the self is entirely fake, but it is far less original than we like to believe. Most personalities are assemblages, collections of socially approved traits, roles, and beliefs stitched together over time. Authenticity is possible, but only if we first confront the layers of conditioning that make us believe we are free. To know who you really are, you must strip away what society has needed you to be, and very few are brave enough to begin. Most education is indoctrination. Education is held up as the cornerstone of enlightenment, the path to critical thinking, empowerment, and personal growth. But this idealized version of schooling masks a darker reality. Most education systems are not designed to foster independent thought, but to condition obedience, reinforce social norms, and perpetuate power structures. What we call education is often indoctrination, carefully disguised as learning. From the earliest levels, education teaches children what to think, not how to think. The curriculum is pre-selected. The answers are predetermined. Teachers are gatekeepers, not guides. Students are rewarded for memorization, not exploration. Creativity is encouraged only when it fits within testable parameters. Questions that challenge the foundational assumptions of the system, political, historical, ethical, are often unwelcome. The classroom becomes a controlled environment, not an open arena of ideas. This system didn't evolve by accident. It reflects the needs of industrial society. In the 19th and 20th centuries, mass education was developed to produce disciplined workers, obedient citizens, and manageable populations. Bell schedules, grading systems, and standardized tests weren't just educational tools, they were instruments of social engineering. They taught punctuality, conformity, and respect for authority far more effectively than they taught curiosity. History classes sanitize the past. Civics classes celebrate national myths. Economic theories are presented as neutral when they reflect specific ideological assumptions. Even science, often seen as objective, is framed through the lens of what is politically or commercially useful. Education does not just transmit knowledge, it transmits ideology. What is excluded from the curriculum is just as revealing as what is included. You rarely learn about labor movements, colonial atrocities, or radical thinkers unless you seek them out. Philosophy is optional. Ethics is sidelined. Emotional intelligence is barely addressed. Meanwhile, obedience is rewarded. Those who raise uncomfortable questions risk being labeled disruptive or unfocused. Critical thinking is praised in theory, but punished in practice when it challenges authority. Indoctrination is most effective when it is invisible. Students don't feel coerced, they feel successful. They internalize the metrics of achievement, grades, honors, degrees. They compete for approval without questioning who sets the standards or why. By the time they graduate, many have forgotten how to doubt systemically. They know how to function, not how to challenge. This does not mean all teachers are indoctrinators. Many try to resist the system, to create space for real thinking. But they operate within a structure designed to discipline minds, not liberate them. Real education, the kind that awakens, provokes, and transforms, is rare, difficult, and often subversive. To be truly educated, one must first unlearn much of what was taught. One must reclaim the right to question not just content, but context. Why is this taught? Who benefits? What is being left out? Only by facing these questions can we break the spell of indoctrination and begin the real work of learning. The drive to dominate is primal, not pathological. Modern psychology often treats the desire to dominate others as a pathology, a trait associated with narcissism, psychopathy, or trauma. But this view sanitizes the deeper truth. The drive to dominate is not a disease of the mind, it is a feature of the species. It is ancient, instinctual, and wired into the very structure of life. From evolutionary biology to political history, domination is not an aberration, it is the norm. All organisms seek to maximize their survival and reproduction. In social species like humans, this often involves competition for status, resources, and influence. Those who control more territory, more food, more mates, or more allies have historically had greater evolutionary success. This primal calculus did not disappear with civilization, it simply changed form. We no longer dominate with clubs and fangs, at least not always, but with money, rhetoric, credentials, and legislation. From childhood, dominance behavior emerges spontaneously. Children compete for attention, control games, and test limits. Even in innocent play, hierarchies form. Schools reinforce this by ranking performance and behavior. Adults, too, engage in subtle battles of control in families, workplaces, and friendships. Promotions, arguments, even compliments can carry dominance dynamics. Some dominate overtly, others passively, but the impulse is there. Societies organize around these instincts. Politics is a formalized battleground for dominance. Leaders rise by persuading, coercing, or overpowering rivals. Nations compete for dominance through diplomacy, war, or economic leverage. Even ideologies, religions, economic systems, philosophies compete to dominate worldviews, to shape how billions think and live. Calling this pathological misses the point. Not all dominance is violent or destructive. It can manifest as leadership, ambition, or excellence. The problem is not the instinct itself, but the delusion of moral superiority attached to it. People dominate while pretending they are helping, protecting, or serving. Power hides behind virtue. Religious leaders dominate by claiming divine authority. Politicians dominate by invoking the people. Corporations dominate by claiming innovation or necessity. The drive is the same, to shape the environment to one's will, but the disguise varies. In many cases, domination is more effective when it's subtle and psychological, rather than overtly forceful. To understand domination as primal is not to excuse cruelty. It is to recognize that the impulse exists in all of us, not just in dictators or abusers. It allows us to stop projecting the problem onto others and start examining our own behavior. When do we seek control? Why do we fear being controlled? What are we willing to do to win? Only when the instinct is made visible can it be channeled, not suppressed. The drive to dominate can fuel growth, leadership, and strength, if coupled with self-awareness and ethical grounding. But denied or hidden, it festers into manipulation, repression, and abuse. Dominance is not a flaw, it is a force. Like fire, it can warm or burn, depending on how we choose to wield it. Even the search for truth can be a mask for power. The pursuit of truth is often portrayed as a noble and objective endeavor, the cornerstone of science, philosophy, journalism, and justice. But Michel Foucault challenged this ideal, arguing that even the quest for truth can serve as a vehicle for power, not liberation. Institutions, ideologies, and individuals may claim to seek truth, but often what they truly desire is authority, the right to define what is real, what is moral, and what is possible. Truth is not discovered in a vacuum. It is produced through systems of discourse, language, institutions, and practices that shape how knowledge is created, validated, and disseminated. Universities, courts, religious orders, media outlets, and scientific bodies all construct and police what counts as truth. These are not neutral bodies, they are hierarchies with gatekeepers, agendas, and interests. To seek truth within these systems is often to submit to their frameworks, and those frameworks are shaped by those in power. Consider science, the supposed epitome of objectivity. While the scientific method aims for impartiality, research priorities are heavily influenced by funding sources, political agendas, and commercial interests. Studies that reinforce dominant narratives are more likely to be funded, published, and circulated. Contradictory findings, even if rigorously researched, are often buried or discredited. The search for truth becomes curated, favoring what is profitable or politically acceptable. Religious institutions have long used the truth of God to justify conquest, colonization, and social control. Philosophical traditions have been manipulated to legitimize class structures and gender roles. Even personal truth-seeking can be performative, a way to appear wise, virtuous, or enlightened, while subtly asserting intellectual dominance. In many debates, people aren't searching for truth, they're fighting to win, to convert, to impose. Foucault's concept of regimes of truth explains how every society has mechanisms for distinguishing true from false, and how these mechanisms are deeply political. Who gets to speak? What methods are deemed credible? What questions are considered legitimate? These decisions are made not by an impartial universe, but by those who control the discourse. This doesn't mean all truth is relative, or that knowledge is meaningless. It means that truth is never free from context. The claim, "this is true," is always embedded in networks of power, privilege, and authority. To understand this is to become more skeptical, not in the sense of rejecting all knowledge, but in constantly asking, who benefits from this truth? Who is excluded by it? What alternatives are being silenced? The search for truth can elevate or oppress. It can enlighten or indoctrinate. It depends on how it is wielded. Truth, like a sword, can defend the weak or cut them down in the name of order. The wise do not simply seek truth, they interrogate the motives behind the seeking. Men do not seek peace, they seek superiority. Throughout history, peace has been lauded as the highest goal of civilization, a state toward which humanity aspires. But a more brutal reading of human behavior suggests otherwise. Men do not truly seek peace, they seek superiority. Peace is often valued only when it reinforces one's advantage, protects power, or offers strategic pause. Underneath the rhetoric of diplomacy, unity, and reconciliation lies the deeper, primal drive to dominate. This impulse is not confined to war or politics. It plays out in relationships, careers, ideologies, and even art. Men, and more broadly, human beings desire to be better than others. They crave victory, not equality, recognition, not anonymity, control, not compromise. Peace, in this framework, is a means to an end, not an end in itself. Nietzsche understood this well. The will to power, in his view, was not just about conquering others, but about asserting the self, becoming more than what one is. This striving is inherently competitive. To improve oneself is often to outdo someone else. Success is measured not in absolute terms, but in comparison. Who is richer, more respected, more desirable, more feared? The myth of peaceful intention masks this reality. Nations claim to desire peace, but their actions, military expansion, economic exploitation, political interference, reveal a different motive. They want peace on their terms, peace that affirms their supremacy. When weaker nations resist, they are framed as threats. When rival powers grow, they are met with suspicion. Real peace would require mutual vulnerability, something few are willing to risk. On a personal level, men often pursue dominance in more subtle forms. Status, competition, rivalry, these are normalized as ambition or confidence. In relationships, superiority can take the form of emotional control, intellectual condescension, or financial leverage. Even acts of generosity can carry a hidden assertion. I am the one who gives, not the one who needs. This doesn't mean people are incapable of cooperation or compassion, but even cooperation often functions as strategic alliance, not true surrender of power. People team up when it benefits them. They make peace when the cost of conflict outweighs the gains. Beneath this is always the silent negotiation of advantage. The discomfort with this idea lies in its implication, that morality may be secondary to hierarchy, and that peace is often a convenient illusion. To admit that superiority drives behavior is to admit that much of human interaction is not about justice or harmony, but about position: who leads, who follows, who commands, who obeys. The question then is not whether peace is possible, but whether it is truly desired. For many, peace means stillness, and stillness means stagnation, vulnerability, or decline. The deeper desire is not for stillness, but for ascendancy. And that is why history is not a story of peace punctuated by war, but war punctuated by intermissions. You are born into a war of ideas. Neutrality is complicity. From the moment of birth, individuals are embedded in a cultural, ideological, and informational battlefield. Every society is a contest of ideas about truth, justice, freedom, morality, identity. These ideas are not passive. They are weapons, each seeking dominance over hearts, minds, and behavior. To exist in the world is to be surrounded by competing visions of what the world should be, and to ignore that is not neutrality. It is complicity. Neutrality assumes a false distance, the notion that one can stand apart from ideological battles without becoming implicated in their outcomes. But refusing to choose is, in effect, choosing the status quo. Silence reinforces power. Indifference is an endorsement of whatever structure currently holds sway. As Desmond Tutu said, "If you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor." Ideas are not just thoughts, they shape institutions, laws, and lives. Beliefs about race, gender, class, economics, and religion structure society. They determine who gets opportunities and who is marginalized. They justify war, exploitation, charity, and resistance. Every law passed, every book banned, every curriculum written is part of this ideological war. To be unaware of it is to be disarmed within it. Even language is not neutral. The words we use carry history, hierarchy, and power. To call someone a criminal or a patriot, a terrorist or a freedom fighter, is not just descriptive, it's ideological. Language frames how we perceive reality, and those who control language often control consciousness itself. Education systems are battlegrounds. So are media, religion, and art. What's taught in school, shown on news broadcasts, allowed on social platforms, all of it is curated, filtered, and framed. These are not accidental choices. They reflect struggles for control over the collective narrative. To consume this content passively is to absorb ideology without defense. Claiming neutrality in such a context is a luxury often afforded only to those whose identities and interests are already protected. For the oppressed, neutrality is not an option. Survival demands engagement. For the privileged, neutrality often serves as camouflage, a way to avoid accountability while maintaining comfort. Being born into a war of ideas doesn't mean becoming dogmatic, it means becoming aware. It means asking, whose voice is missing? What values are being pushed? What is being protected or concealed? It means resisting the temptation to disengage, especially when the outcomes of these battles determine real human suffering. Every generation inherits unresolved conflicts, and every individual must decide whether to challenge or comply. To pretend you can float above it all is to sink into invisibility, to become an instrument of forces you refuse to name. The world does not pause for neutrality. It moves with or without you. The only question is which direction you help it move toward. There is no you, only a performance endlessly rehearsed. The concept of a stable, authentic self, a you, that exists beneath the masks, is one of the most persistent illusions in modern consciousness. People are taught to believe in a core identity, a genuine self that can be discovered, improved, or expressed. But under the scrutiny of post-structuralist thought, this belief begins to disintegrate. Thinkers like Michel Foucault, Judith Butler, and Irving Goffman argued that the self is not a core, but a stage. And what we call identity is nothing more than a performance, endlessly rehearsed for various audiences. Each person moves through life assuming different roles: student, employee, friend, lover, citizen. Each role comes with expectations, scripts, and norms. We adjust our speech, body language, clothing, and emotional tone based on the context. Around family, we may be dutiful and calm. Around friends, expressive and relaxed. In public, composed and guarded. These changes are so fluid and automatic that we forget we are acting at all. This is not deception, it's adaptation. Humans are social beings. From infancy, we learn to mirror, mimic, and conform. We are rewarded for playing our roles well, and punish subtly or overtly for breaking character. Over time, we internalize the performance so deeply that we begin to believe it is who we are. But remove the context, and the self collapses. Strip away the costumes, and there is no actor, only a void, waiting for the next script. Social media magnifies this phenomenon. Online, individuals curate their identities with even more precision. They choose what to show, how to speak, which version of themselves to promote. Influencers aren't anomalies. They are simply the most self-aware performers in a society built on performance. Authenticity becomes another aesthetic, another role to play convincingly. Even introspection is shaped by external influences. The language we use to describe ourselves, introvert, empath, achiever, survivor, comes from cultural categories. Our memories are not objective records but narratives shaped by mood, repetition, and suggestion. Our sense of continuity, the feeling that we are the same person over time, is a psychological construction. The past is edited, the future is imagined, the present is constantly shifting. If there is no fixed self, what remains? A flux, a constantly evolving performance. This doesn't mean there's nothing at all, but it means that identity is not discovered. It is assembled. Not from some hidden inner truth, but from a repertoire of social cues, personal experiences, and cultural templates. There is no you behind the performance. The performance is all there is. This can be disorienting, but also liberating. If the self is a performance, then it can be rewritten. If there is no essence, there is no fate. The act can change. The role can evolve. The only requirement is the courage to see the mask as a mask and then choose how to wear it. The noble suffer alone. The mediocre demand sympathy. There is a profound distinction between how the noble and the mediocre endure suffering. The noble bear their pain in silence, not out of pride or stoicism, but because they understand that suffering, at its core, is a solitary ordeal. They do not use their pain as a means to extract pity or social capital. The mediocre, by contrast, often weaponize suffering. They broadcast it, dramatize it, and use it as leverage to gain sympathy, attention, or moral superiority. This is not about denying help to those in pain. Suffering is universal, and empathy is essential, but the way in which one suffers reveals the architecture of character. The noble do not see suffering as a currency. They do not feel entitled to reward simply because they hurt. They do not advertise their wounds as proof of virtue. Instead, they go inward. They confront their anguish without expecting the world to pause and accommodate them. To suffer nobly is not to pretend everything is fine. It is to recognize that dignity is forged in solitude. Some burdens cannot be shared. Some wounds must be endured alone, without applause. The noble accept this, and in doing so, they cultivate resilience. They become not victims, but stewards of their own endurance. The mediocre suffer performatively. Their pain must be seen, validated, affirmed. They mistake attention for healing. They demand an audience. Their identity becomes intertwined with their injury. To question their choices becomes an attack on their experience. In a culture that often confuses visibility with meaning, suffering becomes a badge, a brand. Social media amplifies this trend. Platforms reward disclosure with engagement. People spill their pain for likes and sympathy. While some of this is cathartic and sincere, much of it becomes habitual exhibitionism, a constant need to reaffirm victimhood. Suffering becomes commodified. The more loudly one hurts, the more virtue one is presumed to possess. Nietzsche warned of this in his critique of resentment, the psychology of the weak, who reframe their inferiority as moral superiority. Instead of striving to overcome their suffering, they sanctify it. They insist the world owes them something because they have been wronged. In doing so, they trade the strength of transformation for the comfort of validation. To suffer alone is not to reject connection, but to maintain integrity. It is a refusal to exploit pain. The noble suffer not because they are emotionally numb, but because they recognize that some suffering is sacred, too deep too private, too real to be used as social currency. They emerge from their trials altered, not louder. True greatness is not found in the spectacle of pain, but in the quiet confrontation of it. The noble do not need applause to survive. Their strength is silent, and that silence is their power. To be truly free is to reject everything sacred. Freedom is a word loaded with contradictions. People often believe they are free while living under the weight of deeply internalized beliefs, traditions, and moral codes. But true freedom, the radical, existential kind, is not about having choices within a structure. It is about rejecting the structure entirely, especially the parts that are considered sacred. To be free, in the truest sense, is to desecrate the untouchable, to challenge the unquestionable, to walk away from the inherited and embrace the unknown. The sacred is whatever a society places beyond criticism. It is not always religious. It can be nationalism, family, tradition, money, democracy, or even love. The sacred is that which you are not allowed to mock, question, or reimagine. It is protected by taboo, enforced by shame, and surrounded by rituals. But behind this reverence lies a mechanism of control. The sacred exists to anchor conformity. It limits imagination. It draws boundaries around what is sayable, thinkable, and doable. From a young age, people are trained to revere certain ideas. They are told what is good, what is evil, what is normal. These values are not chosen, they are inherited. To challenge them is to risk exile, punishment, or psychological collapse. But unless one challenges them, freedom is impossible. One remains a prisoner of inherited reverence. Friedrich Nietzsche understood this deeply. His proclamation that God is dead was not a literal statement about the divine. It was a philosophical rebellion against the sacralization of values. He argued that to become truly free, one must go beyond good and evil, beyond the moral dichotomies imposed by religious and societal dogma. The Übermensch, Nietzsche's ideal of the higher human, is not someone who obeys higher laws, but someone who creates new values. True freedom is dangerous because it leaves one untethered. It requires facing the abyss. Once the sacred is rejected, there are no guarantees, no pre-written meaning, no eternal justice, no divine safety net. Most people cannot handle this. They prefer comforting illusions. They trade freedom for familiarity, risk for ritual. They choose to worship because worship feels safer than agency. Rejecting the sacred does not mean embracing nihilism. It means embracing the burden of authorship. You must decide what is meaningful. You must face suffering without promised redemption. You must create joy without divine permission. It is a terrifying responsibility, but it is also the only path to genuine autonomy. To desecrate the sacred is not to destroy all value. It is to rebuild value consciously, deliberately, from the ground up. It is to walk away from inherited gods and learn to stand alone. Only then, when you owe reverence to nothing, can you say you are free. Love decays into obligation. Love, at its origin, is spontaneous. It arises without calculation, a surge of emotional and physical connection, a longing to be near, to understand, to merge. It is unpredictable, electrifying, and often irrational. But the moment love begins to settle into stability, especially within formal structures like marriage, long-term relationships, or family roles, it begins to change. What began as desire becomes a set of duties. What once was passionate becomes procedural. Love, if not carefully maintained, decays into obligation. This transition is not always conscious. In the beginning, people act out of affection. They call because they want to hear the other's voice. They give because giving feels natural. They touch, listen, and show up freely. But over time, those same actions become expected. They transform from offerings into requirements. One partner begins to feel that they must call, must give, must perform, not out of desire, but out of duty. When that shift happens, the relationship moves from intimacy to routine. The decay is often subtle. The "I want to" becomes "I should." The anticipation becomes scheduling. "How was your day?" turns from a genuine question into a script. The gestures persist, but the spirit behind them fades. What was once vibrant becomes maintenance. People start checking boxes instead of opening doors. Culturally, this shift is often institutionalized. Society encourages the idea that love must be bound by vows, contracts, or roles. Spouses become caregivers. Parents become providers. Friends become therapists. Over time, the freedom to love is replaced by the expectation to fulfill. And with expectation comes resentment, because when love is demanded, it no longer feels like love. It feels like labor. This transformation is especially common in long-term relationships, where people confuse commitment with emotional debt. "After everything I've done for you," becomes a common refrain. Acts of love are recorded, tallied, and used as leverage. The past is weaponized to control the present. The relationship becomes a negotiation of unmet needs and unspoken disappointments. But love cannot be sustained by duty alone. Once obligation becomes the primary force, love suffocates. True affection needs space and choice. It must be continually chosen, not assumed. When partners stop seeing each other as individuals and begin to see each other as functions, the one who does the chores, who pays the bills, who watches the kids, the connection begins to fade. They fall in love with a memory while managing a system. This isn't to say that commitment is incompatible with love. But commitment must be alive, nourished by curiosity, vulnerability, and mutual evolution. Without this, love becomes fossilized, a relic of what once was. Obligation is necessary at times, but when it becomes the dominant mode, it turns love into a chore performed out of fear or guilt rather than joy. The tragedy isn't that love ends, it's that it becomes invisible beneath the weight of everything it's supposed to be. Most people confuse routine with purpose. Purpose is one of the deepest human cravings. People want to feel that their life has meaning, that their actions matter, that their presence is more than just an accident. But for many, true purpose is too difficult to define, too abstract to grasp. So, they replace it with something easier, more tangible, routine. And over time, they begin to mistake routine for purpose. Routine is comforting. It gives shape to the day, predictability to the week, and rhythm to the years. Waking up at the same time, commuting, working, eating, relaxing, sleeping, the repetition offers a sense of control in a chaotic world. But control is not meaning. Doing something every day doesn't automatically make it valuable. Repetition is not significance. The danger of routine is that it becomes automatic. People stop asking why they do what they do. They just do it. Go to work, pay bills, raise kids, retire. It's not that these things are meaningless, it's that they are rarely examined. The deeper question, what am I here for, is buried under a pile of calendars and notifications. Instead of answering it, people distract themselves with tasks. They live lives of efficiency, not reflection. This confusion is socially reinforced. Society praises consistency. Those who follow schedules, meet deadlines, and maintain stability are rewarded. But stability is not the same as growth. A person can be highly functional and still spiritually empty. They can execute routines flawlessly while never exploring their deeper needs, passions, or values. The illusion deepens because routine often mimics purpose. A job becomes a career, which becomes an identity. But when asked why they chose it, many people respond with practical answers. Security, opportunity, convenience, not passion or conviction. Their work pays the bills, but doesn't feed the soul. Yet they defend it, because the alternative, confronting the possibility that they've spent years in autopilot, is terrifying. Routine can also be a defense mechanism. It protects against existential anxiety. If you're busy, you don't have time to question. The noise of routine drowns out the silence where real questions live. In this way, routine becomes a distraction from meaning, not a pathway to it. This doesn't mean all routine is bad. Some repetition can nurture discipline, health, and growth. But when routine becomes a substitute for self-inquiry, it calcifies the spirit. People stop dreaming. They lose curiosity. They tell themselves they're doing what they're supposed to do, even if they no longer remember who told them that. Purpose is not something that appears on a schedule. It demands pause, doubt, discomfort. It asks people to step outside the familiar and confront what truly moves them. And that is why so few find it, not because it's hidden, but because they're too busy to look. Morality is a convenient lie for the masses. Morality is often presented as a timeless set of principles, a universal guide to right and wrong. But in reality, morality is not absolute. It is a constructed narrative, shaped by culture, history, and power. And more often than not, it functions not as a compass, but as a tool of social control. It keeps people in line, justifies authority, and masks inequality. In this light, morality is not a divine truth. It is a convenient lie designed for the masses, not the masters. Friedrich Nietzsche called this slave morality, a system of values invented by the weak to constrain the strong. Instead of celebrating power, ambition, and excellence, slave morality elevates meekness, obedience, and humility. It punishes those who rise above and sanctifies those who stay below. This inversion allows the weak to feel superior, not through strength, but through suffering. I am moral, they say, because I do not fight, because I do not dominate. But what they call morality is often just fear dressed up as virtue. This system benefits rulers and institutions. Religions teach that poverty is virtuous, making people less likely to rebel. Governments declare loyalty a moral duty, ensuring obedience. Societies turn complex ethical questions into binaries, good versus evil, right versus wrong. This simplification ensures that the herd stays manageable. To question morality is to risk being labeled immoral, which is often worse than being wrong. People follow moral rules not because they've deeply reflected on them, but because they've been conditioned to. From a young age, they're taught what's acceptable. They're punished for deviation and praised for compliance. Over time, this conditioning becomes internalized. People feel guilty not because they've done harm, but because they've violated an arbitrary rule. Moral codes shift dramatically across cultures and eras. What was moral 100 years ago may be criminal today. Slavery, once morally justified, is now universally condemned. The same applies to views on sexuality, gender, war, and justice. If morality were truly objective, it wouldn't be so malleable. Its fluidity reveals its function, to maintain order, not to reflect eternal truths. This does not mean ethics are meaningless, but it does mean we must differentiate between ethics grounded in conscious reasoning and moral codes that are inherited, unexamined, and used to manipulate behavior. The masses are not encouraged to think morally, they are trained to conform. The greatest moral acts in history, those of revolutionaries, whistleblowers, and truth-tellers, often involved breaking the moral codes of their time. They were condemned, exiled, or killed, only to be sanctified later. This pattern reveals the paradox. To be truly moral often requires being immoral in the eyes of society. Morality, then, is not a guide to righteousness. It is a mirror of power, tradition, and fear. It comforts the masses, flatters their goodness, and keeps them tame. The truth lies not in what is called moral, but in why it is called that at all. Self-sacrifice often hides deep resentment. Self-sacrifice is frequently praised as the highest moral virtue, the act of putting others before oneself, giving without expectation, enduring hardship for the benefit of another. But beneath its noble surface, self-sacrifice can conceal something darker: resentment. When people give too much of themselves, especially without being asked, acknowledged, or reciprocated, their altruism can curdle into bitterness. They begin to feel owed, even if they never said so. They keep a silent ledger. And when that debt isn't repaid in gratitude, affection, or recognition, they suffer, quietly at first, then with increasing bitterness. This resentment often remains hidden. The self-sacrificer may not even be fully aware of it. They continue to give, to serve, to endure, believing it's the right thing. But each act of unnoticed sacrifice adds weight. Eventually, their generosity starts to feel like a burden not just to themselves, but to those around them. The people they tried to help become sources of frustration. They begin to think, after everything I've done, why don't they appreciate me? Why do they take me for granted? The truth is, many acts of self-sacrifice are not purely selfless. They are bargains in disguise. The sacrifice is made with an unspoken hope that the other person will notice, care, and reciprocate. When that doesn't happen, the self-sacrificer feels betrayed not because they were wronged, but because their unspoken terms were violated. This is especially common in familial and romantic relationships. A parent gives everything to their child: time, money, dreams deferred, and then, years later, feels neglected or disrespected when the child makes independent choices. A partner constantly puts the other's needs first, but secretly grows bitter when their own needs go unmet. These sacrifices are not unconditional, they're investments with invisible interest rates. This dynamic becomes more toxic when the self-sacrificer begins to use their suffering as moral leverage. They weaponize their pain. Look what I gave up for you. It becomes a tool for guilt, a way to control or manipulate. The one who sacrificed becomes the martyr, the victim, the righteous sufferer. And, in this position, they are often immune to criticism because how can you question someone who gave so much? True generosity requires clarity of intention. If you're giving with the hope of return, then it's not a gift, it's a trade. That doesn't make it bad, but it must be acknowledged. Unspoken expectations are the breeding ground for resentment. It's better to express your needs openly than to hope someone reads your sacrifices like tea leaves. Healthy sacrifice is chosen freely, communicated clearly, and released without strings. Anything else risks becoming a quiet war one, where the self-sacrificer bleeds slowly, then blames others for not noticing. The solution is not to stop caring, but to stop pretending that pain is virtue. You don't earn love by suffering. And if your love costs your selfhood, it was never love, it was self-erasure in search of validation. The deepest truths can never be said, only suffered. There are truths so profound, so primal, so existentially raw, that they cannot be captured in words. Language, no matter how refined, is too blunt an instrument. It carves the world into categories: subject, object, cause, effect, and in doing so, it loses what it tries to express. The deepest truths exist beneath language, not above it. They live in the body, the psyche, the wound, and they are not learned, they are endured. These truths are the kind that strike in silence. The grief of losing someone who was your anchor, the terror of facing your own insignificance, the moment you realize a lifelong belief was a comforting lie. These moments do not arrive as coherent insights, they arrive as shocks, as tears, as paralysis, as long nights staring into the dark. You do not explain them, you live through them. They bruise the soul. Philosophy tries to articulate truth, but even its most brilliant formulations collapse at the edge of experience. No essay can convey the reality of watching a parent die slowly. No quote can capture the loneliness of feeling like a stranger in your own life. These things must be felt, not theorized. Words may circle around them, but they never land. They remain metaphors floating above something visceral and inexpressible. Religious mystics understood this. They spoke of ineffable truths, insights gained not through intellect but through suffering, renunciation, or ecstatic experience. Their words are always paradoxical, because paradox is the only way to approach what cannot be said directly. The way up is the way down. Only those who die before they die can live. These aren't puzzles, they're maps written in shadow. Even art which transcends logic can only hint at these truths. A painting may evoke despair. A piece of music may break you open. But the truth it conveys is not in the notes or colors, it's in the emotional resonance they awaken. Art doesn't tell you the truth. It reminds you of something you already knew, but couldn't articulate. We live in a culture obsessed with clarity, explanation, and expression. But some truths defy all three. They are experienced in trauma, in solitude, in moments of collapse. They don't come to be shared, they come to reshape you. Afterward, you are not the same. And when someone asks you what happened, you might say, "I don't know how to explain it." Because you don't. Not really. These are the truths that strip away illusions. They teach not through lessons, but through scars. They are not philosophies to be debated, but realities to be survived. And once you've survived, you carry them with you not as knowledge, but as a presence in your bones. The deepest truths don't enlighten, they transform. Institutions don't care about truth, only stability. Institutions, governments, religions, corporations, universities present themselves as seekers and guardians of truth. They claim to uphold knowledge, justice, and progress. But beneath these proclamations lies a more practical and often cynical reality. Institutions are not built for truth, they are built for stability. Their survival depends not on honesty, but on order, predictability, and control. Truth is volatile. It disrupts. It challenges norms, questions authority, and threatens established hierarchies. A single inconvenient truth can unravel decades of policy, theology, or policy. That's why institutions often prefer the illusion of truth, a version that supports their structure, protects their legitimacy, and keeps people cooperative. This is visible in history. Religious institutions suppressed scientific discoveries that contradicted Scripture. Governments censored dissenting voices during wars or social upheavals. Corporations buried studies that exposed harmful practices. In each case, the truth was secondary to the preservation of the system. Stability mattered more than enlightenment. Education systems claim to teach critical thinking, yet they often avoid controversial topics or frame them within accepted narratives. Textbooks are sanitized. Curricula are shaped not by what is most true, but by what is least disruptive. This is not accidental, it is a feature of systems designed to produce conformity, not awaken inquiry. Universities, while more open, are also bound by funding, politics, and reputation. Research is influenced by grants, tenure pressures, and institutional alliances. Academics may pursue truth, but institutions often constrain what truths are safe to pursue. Even science, which prides itself on objectivity, is filtered through these lenses. Data can be manipulated. Findings can be suppressed. The scientific process may be rigorous, but the institutions that fund and publish it are not always motivated by purity. In politics, truth is often a liability. Leaders prioritize narrative coherence over factual accuracy. The goal is not to inform, but to persuade. Policy is justified through selective data and emotional appeal, not empirical truth. When truth conflicts with national interest or party loyalty, it is quickly sacrificed on the altar of stability. This doesn't mean that all institutions are malicious. Many are filled with people who genuinely care. But the logic of an institution is self-preservation. And truth, by its nature, is indifferent to preservation. It asks uncomfortable questions. It refuses to settle. It demands change. The public, too, often prefers stability over truth. People want to believe in systems. They want consistency, not chaos. Truth threatens that comfort. That's why whistleblowers are punished. That's why journalists who expose corruption are marginalized. Speaking the truth often means being cast out. Real truth-telling is radical. It destabilizes. That's why institutions, even when they invoke truth, often only mean approved truth, the kind that keeps the machinery running. The rest is dismissed, hidden, or framed as dangerous. Because, at the end of the day, institutions don't ask, "Is it true?" They ask, "Will this break us?" Even knowledge can become a prison. Knowledge is often seen as the ultimate liberator, the force that pulls humanity out of ignorance, fear, and superstition. It's the torch of the Enlightenment, the promise of science, the foundation of progress. But what is rarely acknowledged is that knowledge, when unexamined, rigidified, or institutionalized, can become its own kind of prison. It can trap minds, restrict perception, and create illusions of certainty that are just as confining as ignorance. This is most evident in systems where knowledge becomes dogma. Religious doctrines, once fluid explorations of mystery, often harden into fixed creeds. Scientific paradigms, initially born from curiosity, become intellectual orthodoxy. Academic disciplines wall themselves off from each other, turning dynamic questions into ossified silos. What began as discovery becomes doctrine, and doctrine resists change. When people identify too strongly with what they know, they lose the ability to question it. Their worldview becomes static. They defend their knowledge not because it's necessarily true, but because it defines their identity. They stop learning, not because there is nothing left to learn, but because admitting uncertainty threatens the foundation they stand on. Knowledge becomes armor not to protect against error, but to protect the ego. Language plays a key role in this confinement. Words and labels help us understand the world, but they also limit it. The more we name things, the more we assume we understand them. A diagnosis becomes a definition. A theory becomes a lens through which all else is interpreted. People stop seeing reality, they start seeing categories. The richness of the world is reduced to mental shortcuts, and curiosity gives way to control. Socially, knowledge becomes a tool of gatekeeping. Only those with certain degrees, credentials, or institutional affiliations are deemed experts. Others are dismissed, even when their insights are valid. This creates intellectual elitism, where knowledge is hoarded rather than shared, and dissent is treated as heresy. Power hides behind the facade of expertise, and dissenting voices are labeled uninformed, regardless of substance. There is also the problem of information overload. In the digital age, people are drowning in data. The constant stream of facts, theories, and opinions creates paralysis. People mistake accumulation for understanding. They scroll, absorb, forget, and repeat, never pausing to integrate or reflect. The mind becomes cluttered, and the deeper truths get lost in the noise. Knowing more, paradoxically, can lead to knowing nothing well. Even personal knowledge stories we tell about ourselves can become cages. I'm not good at that. I've always been this way. These beliefs may once have served a purpose, but over time they harden into limits. Growth becomes impossible not because of reality, but because of the narrative we refuse to update. To escape the prison of knowledge requires humility, the willingness to say, "I don't know," and to live in that space without panic. It requires curiosity over certainty, openness over control. Knowledge can liberate, but only when it remains a tool, not a throne. Everything we celebrate is built on a forgotten grave. Human history is a story of triumphs built atop tragedies, a parade of progress that marches across forgotten graves. Nations, economies, technologies, even holidays are layered upon layers of suffering, conquest, and silence. The monuments we praise, the systems we inherit, the comforts we enjoy, all are constructed on top of someone else's loss. And we rarely remember, let alone acknowledge, the bones beneath our celebrations. Civilizations rise by dominating others. Empires expand by enslaving, erasing, and assimilating. The wealth of Europe was built on colonization, the exploitation of indigenous lands, and centuries of stolen labor. Modern democracies hail liberty while standing on land acquired through genocide. Industrial growth was driven by factories run on child labor, coal from ruined ecosystems, and the backs of expendable workers. These foundations are not exceptions, they are the norm. Yet these origins are sanitized. They're glossed over in textbooks, omitted from ceremonies, and replaced with patriotic myths. National holidays celebrate independence without mentioning whose lives were crushed in the process. Statues honor leaders while ignoring whose blood paved their roads to power. The grief is buried literally and metaphorically because remembering is inconvenient. Acknowledging the graves would interrupt the narrative of progress. Even cultural achievements are steeped in loss. Music born from the pain of slavery becomes commercialized pop. Cuisine shaped by poverty and survival becomes gourmet dining. Art created under oppression is celebrated once it's safe, long after the artist is gone. What was once resistance becomes a brand, stripped of its origin story. Personal success is no exception. Many people rise through systems that quietly benefit them while disadvantaging others. Privilege is inherited invisibly. A better education, cleaner neighborhoods, job referrals, unpoliced bodies. People say they worked hard, and often they did, but rarely ask what invisible graves their opportunity was built upon. Every ladder climbed is propped up by someone else's denied ascent. Even the digital world is built on exploitation. Devices are made with rare minerals, mined in hazardous conditions, assembled in factories where workers are expendable, and sold by companies that profit from surveillance and addiction. We scroll, post, and consume without thinking about the invisible human cost encoded in every pixel. This isn't about guilt, it's about honesty. Celebration without reflection becomes complicity. To enjoy what we have while denying its origins is to perpetuate the cycle. Remembering the graves beneath the feast doesn't mean we can't celebrate. It means we celebrate consciously, with humility, with reverence, and with responsibility. Progress is not evil, but unexamined progress becomes moral amnesia. A truly evolved society does not build higher by burying the past, it builds with an awareness of what lies beneath. Every triumph should echo with the memory of those who were never allowed to triumph, those whose names were never carved into the monuments they helped create. We worship comfort at the cost of authenticity. Comfort is one of the most seductive ideals of modern life. From climate-controlled homes and prepackaged meals to endless entertainment and social convenience, society is designed to eliminate discomfort at every level. But comfort has a hidden price. In our obsessive pursuit of ease, we often sacrifice authenticity, the rawness, vulnerability, and friction that make life real. We become safe, yes, but also hollow. Comfort encourages avoidance. Difficult conversations are dodged in favor of politeness. Painful truths are silenced for the sake of keeping the peace. People say, "I'm fine," when they're falling apart, because being honest would disrupt the social script. We learn to suppress emotions that make others uncomfortable: grief, anger, fear, and instead perform stability. This curated persona may be digestible, but it's not real. The problem deepens in relationships. Genuine connection requires risk. To be truly known is to expose flaws, contradictions, needs all the things that don't fit cleanly into a polished image. But we prefer relationships that are comfortable, which often means superficial. We trade depth for harmony, truth for tact. Intimacy is replaced by agreement. Instead of confronting each other's pain or growth, we stay in roles that are familiar, even if they are slowly suffocating us. Comfort also fuels conformity. People adopt beliefs, values, and lifestyles that align with their environment, not because they are authentic, but because they are easy. It's easier to go along than to stand out, to fit in than to resist. Even those who appear rebellious often do so within pre-approved boundaries. What masquerades as individuality is often just a market-tested identity designed for approval and low risk. In a culture driven by consumerism, comfort becomes the ultimate currency. Products promise convenience. Experiences promise escape. Emotions are treated with pills or distractions. Everything is engineered to numb the edges of human experience. But those edges, the discomfort of uncertainty, the sting of failure, the ache of longing, are where authenticity lives. Without them, life becomes a smooth surface, with no texture, no contrast, no meaning. Authenticity requires discomfort. It requires saying what you really think, even if it's unpopular. It means feeling what you really feel, even if it's messy. It means choosing the harder path, the one without guarantees, because it aligns with your truth. It means rejecting roles, scripts, and rewards that don't resonate with your core values, even if it costs you approval or convenience. We are not meant to be comfortable all the time. We are meant to be awake. And awakening often hurts. It disturbs. It demands action. But it also brings clarity, presence, and depth. The question is not whether comfort is bad, it's whether we've begun to worship it. Because once comfort becomes the highest goal, truth becomes optional, and life becomes a performance of ease rather than an act of authenticity. Meaning is not found, it is imposed. The common belief that meaning is something to be discovered like a buried treasure hidden deep within the universe is both comforting and misleading. It suggests that life comes with a built-in narrative, a grand design that we can one day stumble upon if we're persistent or pure enough. But this view neglects a fundamental truth. Meaning is not found, it is imposed. It doesn't wait to be uncovered. It is created, declared, and assigned by human consciousness attempting to survive in an indifferent world. The universe offers no inherent significance. Stars burn, planets orbit, species evolve and go extinct, all without commentary. Nature is silent. It does not care whether you achieve your goals, fall in love, or suffer alone. If meaning existed objectively, it would not shift so drastically across time and cultures. But what is sacred in one society is profane in another. What gives life purpose to one generation may seem absurd to the next. This inconsistency reveals that meaning is constructed, not discovered. Humans impose meaning to stave off existential anxiety. The mind cannot tolerate chaos, so it builds frameworks, religion, ideology, morality, even personal identity. These systems provide orientation, but they are fabricated responses to a reality that offers no guidance. They work not because they are true, but because they are functional. They make life bearable. They give us somewhere to stand. This is not to say that meaning is a lie. It is real in the way a painting is real, created, not given. Meaning is an act of authorship. When someone dedicates their life to science, art, love, or justice, they aren't finding meaning, they are choosing to impose it. They are saying, "This matters. I will make it matter." That declaration has weight because it requires responsibility. Unlike inherited meaning, self-imposed meaning must be earned and continually reaffirmed. But this power also carries a burden. If meaning is imposed, it can also be taken away. When someone loses their career, their faith, or their loved one, the meaning they built around it can collapse. The result is existential vertigo. They feel lost, not because they've lost something objective, but because their internal architecture has been dismantled. To recover, they must build again, not wait to find something out there. This realization can be terrifying. It means there are no guaranteed answers, no universal purpose, no cosmic reward for good behavior. But it's also liberating. It means you are not bound by any script but the one you choose to write. You are not waiting for permission to matter. You are not at the mercy of fate's hidden meaning. You are the architect, not the archaeologist. To live meaningfully, then, is not to search, but to declare. It is to impose significance where there was none, boldly, defiantly, and without apology. We invent rules to distract ourselves from chaos. Human beings crave order. We build laws, rituals, hierarchies, and belief systems to create a sense of structure in a world that is fundamentally chaotic. From the macro level of the cosmos to the micro level of daily life, disorder is the natural state of things. Planets collide. Diseases mutate. Accidents happen. People betray. Time decays. There is no ultimate plan, no safety net woven into the fabric of reality. In the face of this, we invent rules not because they reflect the true nature of the world, but because they protect us from having to face it. These rules come in many forms. Legal codes give us the illusion of justice. Moral commandments provide a sense of right and wrong. Social etiquette tells us how to behave. Religious doctrines promise cosmic consequences. Even self-help books, productivity systems, and morning routines are efforts to map the unpredictable to shrink the infinite variables of existence into repeatable patterns. But the underlying purpose is always the same: to manufacture coherence in a reality that is indifferent to coherence. We follow rules not because they are universally true, but because they offer psychological shelter. They reduce uncertainty. They create the feeling of control. They allow us to believe that if we just behave properly, plan carefully, and follow the system, things will turn out the way they're supposed to. This belief is rarely tested until the system breaks. A sudden loss, a betrayal, a natural disaster, a diagnosis, and suddenly, all the rules we lived by seem hollow. Good people suffer. Hard work fails. Justice is denied. The universe doesn't punish or reward, it simply is. The order we thought we were part of begins to unravel, revealing the chaos we were trying so hard not to see. Even our personal identities are built on rules. We define ourselves by roles: parent, employee, citizen, artist, each with its own expectations. But these roles are invented too. They're costumes we wear to give shape to the formless. They help us function socially, but they also limit us. When someone breaks their role, we don't just feel confused, we feel threatened. Because their rupture exposes the arbitrariness of the rules we're still clinging to. This is not an argument for anarchy or nihilism. Rules have utility. They help organize societies, coordinate action, reduce harm. But their value is pragmatic, not sacred. They are scaffolding, not truth. The danger comes when we forget that they are inventions, not revelations. To live with awareness is to know that the rules are a comforting fiction. They are tools, not absolutes. And once we accept that, we can use them wisely, not worship them blindly. We can face chaos not with panic, but with clear-eyed humility. Because the goal is not to eliminate chaos that's impossible, but to dance with it without pretending it's not there. No one escapes suffering, only those who stop pretending can endure it. Suffering is the common thread of human existence. No one, no matter how rich, beautiful, virtuous, or enlightened, escapes it. Life inflicts pain in 1,000 forms: physical deterioration, emotional betrayal, existential dread, and the slow erosion of dreams. But while suffering is inevitable, the way we relate to it determines whether we are broken by it or endure it. And the greatest barrier to endurance is pretense, the refusal to admit that suffering is not just a glitch in the system, but the system itself. Modern culture is allergic to suffering. It sells the dream of a painless life, success without struggle, love without heartbreak, happiness without loss. Advertisements, social media, and self-help gurus promote a vision of life where discomfort is an error to be corrected, not a condition to be understood. As a result, people internalize the idea that if they're suffering, something is wrong with them, that they have failed to optimize, to attract positivity, to think properly. This illusion makes suffering worse. People feel not only pain, but shame for feeling it. They hide their struggles, put on smiles, and pretend everything is fine. They numb themselves with distractions, binge-watching, overworking, self-medicating, anything to avoid sitting alone with what hurts. But pretending doesn't make the pain disappear. It buries it deeper, where it festers and warps into anxiety, resentment, or depression. Endurance begins where pretense ends. The moment you stop trying to edit your pain to make it socially acceptable, the healing can begin. When you allow yourself to say, "Yes, this hurts, and I don't know what to do with it," you break the spell. You make contact with reality, not the curated one, but the raw, unscripted, honest one. And in that contact, a strange kind of strength emerges, not the strength to escape suffering, but to hold it without collapsing. This strength is not stoicism in the macho sense. It's not about toughing it out or suppressing emotion. It's about fully feeling without losing yourself. It's about letting the wave crash over you without pretending it's a breeze. The ones who endure are not those who deny suffering, they are those who make space for it. They sit with it, speak it, and walk through it with eyes wide open. The paradox is that once you stop pretending, suffering becomes less consuming. The energy once spent on denial is freed up for endurance. You can grieve without shame. You can fail without self-destruction. You can be vulnerable without seeing it as weakness. You stop demanding that life be painless and start learning how to live with pain skillfully. No one escapes suffering, but some build walls around it, and some build pathways through it. And the difference between the two is not luck, but honesty, the courage to stop pretending.